everyone doing? I hope you're having a good day. We are back. We got some Earl Grey with lemon. Oh, you can actually kind of see the steam a little bit right here, even on stream. That's kind of cool. You usually don't see that. But we are armed with our tea. And as promised, we're going to do some debate review today. Just, go how long we go, however long it takes to get through this. This one might be a little bit rough because it features a previous villain that we've encountered on the stream before, the uh, the rather repugnant Daniel Haqiqatjou. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I hope that I am, because as much as I take issue with the fellow, it's not my intention to mispronounce his name. Uh, and he is in debate with someone who I believe I've mentioned, but we haven't yet watched on stream. Someone I've seen a bunch of before. Someone by the name of Matt Dillahunty. Now, Matt is an atheist, an activist in that regard. He gets into a lot of debates online, and my main criticism of him is that while being heated is not necessarily a problem in a debate, I think the way he does it often falls into the stereotype of the angry atheist, often isn't really productive or constructive to his position, and comes off as him being very angry. Even though, having watched a lot of his debates, I've come to realize he's just heated, he's just energized, and undoubtedly we're going to see some of that here. Now, don't get me wrong, Daniel gives good reason to get upset. I mean, the man is, his views are absolutely vile, as we've discussed before. And so we'll see how these things go. I don't know that Matt is really the best person to debate Haqiqatjou, but I'm not sure that there is a best person other than someone who goes in fully aware of how just awful he and his views are, and goes in with the intent of just embarrassing him because he's not there to debate. And it's unfortunate because I'm a believer in debate as a positive and constructive mechanism for engagement. I think it can do and can be done well, and like you can get a lot out of debate when it's engaged in authentically. The problem is few are as inauthentic in their debates as Haqiqatjou, and so like it devolves into being about power, and so you do just have to embarrass him. So I don't have like high hopes that we're gonna see a great performance here, but maybe we can see a little bit of like what it looks like when things go wrong. I don't know. I feel like I'm setting my expectations maybe too low, but we'll find out. What they're debating today is, this is on modern day debates, so their topics are often more nebulous than I think is helpful. They're often just like this versus that, and it's like, well, what do you mean by versus? Is it which is better for society? This is something that, uh, coming from competitive debate, that I just kind of miss. Most people engage in arguments and debates in this kind of nebulous sphere of like, we're just vaguely arguing which of our things should win. Not really like, well, what case are we trying to make? What are we trying to prove? What affirmative statement is being made here? Now, that does advantage instances where there shouldn't be a mere negation position. Both sides should have a burden of proof that they're expected to uphold, so it can be helpful there. It's just something I miss. So the topic here, and I guess we can show what I'm talking about, is God, Islam, ethics, and secular humanism. My guess is it's just going to be like argue about these positions and like what your views on these things are. As a reminder to everyone, that is completely unnecessary because they will come out, I imagine, very quickly in Daniel's opening. And no, I haven't seen this. I just have seen him enough to know. Daniel does not value freedom or human happiness or anything that would consider like thriving in a libertarian individualist sense. What I mean by that is like anything that you would think of as like good in your life. Personally, he's probably opposed to that. What he thinks what he'll argue for as though it is the good is things like duty and falling into your place. And he'll treat that as synecdoche for happiness, or he will say that it is proof of additional happiness. Not that he cares about it so much as he knows that other people care about it. So we're gonna remember that values are a real big issue to have here. What we think of as we're often not going to see eye to eye with Daniel at all about what is good. And so when he appeals, notice this. I don't remember if we talked about impacts. Yeah, we did. So like when he has the impacts of his arguments, something to look for, like why this argument matters to someone. Remember, pay attention. He's likely going to impact to values that, well, at the very least, I don't care about. Maybe you do. Maybe you think duty is a relevant value greater than something like freedom or happiness, but I would disagree with you strongly. But he seems to have a PowerPoint ready to go with the title "Is Islam True?" So maybe that's what we'll be discussing. And I'm not. I think I've mentioned what my like stance is on like the veracity of Islam before, but I guess to be thorough and earnest in our engagement, and to be honest about our positions, I do not think that Islam is true. I am an atheist after all. Like every other religion, there are good, positive, and negative aspects to the religion. The biggest problem that I think Islam is facing right now is the number, or the I don't want to say large number because proportionally it might not be, but like the number of people who are proponents of the negative aspects, the power that those people have, and the position that like the position of importance that they hold over public opinion. What I mean by that is that the issue with the religion at the moment is that there are too many people saying the bad parts are the thing that are worthwhile and the best thing about it. There are undoubtedly positive things about Islam, like any other religion, though I do not think it is. I don't think it is a good thing just by being a religion. At a minimum, you could look to the poetry. I've heard the poetry in the Quran is exceptional. I have not actually read it, but I've heard it is very, very good. Like that's a positive. That there are good things about it. That has no bearing as to whether it's true. The truth of the claims are almost certainly nonsense. The idea that that the prophet was visited by a supernatural being. We have no evidence of the existence of supernatural beings. Then took a night ride, like flew up in the sky on his horse. Nonsense. Yeah, like so on and so forth. But we'll let them get into it, and I think there's going to be a little bit of a difference in how this thing goes, because as I was finding the right starting place for this video, I caught the moderator, James, saying something about explaining how this is going to work, so we'll hear him out, see how it's different. And the last thing I want to note is, well, it seems that Daniel has a PowerPoint ready, and he's got computers next to him, whatever. Matt seems to have no computers. He has a notepad, which is great, but doesn't have any such connection, so it seems like he won't have a PowerPoint presentation. This is something I'm like back and forth on. I don't think it is appropriate to have a PowerPoint just because your opponent does. And I think, honestly, there are pros and cons of that kind of presentation in your opening. The positive is actually a little bit in the avenue of deceit. It comes off like your presentation is far more academic. It feels like your college professor is giving the speech, even though it's just some guy from the internet with terrible opinions. But it also does make you look extremely lame and kind of cringe to certain people. So like it's all about how it comes across. The value in sort of like presenting a constructive, like it being constructive in the actual argumentation, is good if both people are taking it in good faith, which is you, instead of having to listen and figure out where the breakpoints are in your opponent's argument and the important things, if they're putting what they ought to put on a PowerPoint, you can look at exactly what they think is important. But yeah, we can just get into it. We'll see how this goes. Oh, YouTube, please. Why does it do this? Sometimes it just when if I pause, it'll have issues loading, but only if I pause. Otherwise, it'll go on just fine. It even has loaded.
Here, the way this
Okay.
debate is going to work is this going to be longer than usual.
Yeah,
It's
I
going
could
to
tell
have
that by the
three
three
different
hour
sections. So in
time code.
particular, we're going to have 1 hour that focuses on the evidence for God, then 1 hour on the evidence for Islam, and then 1 hour
Okay.
on ethics, and more in particular on secular humanism versus Islamic ethics.
That's really
So
interesting.
we are
So it's
going
kind
to
of three
start with
debates in
Matt for
one.
each section.
We might split it up into
There
multiple
are
days for that
10-minute
reason.
openings for each section, followed by
As a note about this, the second part is kind of irrelevant depending on the first one, right? If you cannot demonstrate the existence of a god, then it becomes impossible for you to prove the factuality of any religious claims that rely on it, including Islam. So, uh, but obviously, like neither debater is going to act like even if Matt could conclusively prove that there is no God, Daniel would still argue that Islam is true. It wouldn't matter to him, right?
40 minutes of dialogue, and then there are 30 minutes of Q&A at the end. And then if you can do me a favor and silence your phones for the debate, thanks very much. And Matt, thanks for being with us. The floor is all yours for your opening
Okay.
statement.
Given that this is like kind of three debates, depending on how long it takes us to get through the first part, we might do this over the course of like three streams or something. Because in general, we have found that it is 2 to 1 how much time we of watching the debate and how much time it takes to review it. And I don't want to be here for 7 hours, so I don't know
Thanks
if I
everybody
have
for
that.
showing up.
I don't know if I
My
have it in me.
apologies from the start. I'm on medication that may cause me to have like hiccupy burp things that might make me pause. I'm not having a Mitch McConnell moment. I'm just trying not to be rude.
This is also very,
And
very recent, in
James
case
has
that was
already managed to
unclear.
get Daniel and I to agree on microphones. I don't expect us to agree on a lot after that, but that's where we're at.
It's interesting.
The
This is
first,
another issue I take with modern day debate sometimes, is that they'll have the who should be the negative speak first. It's kind of weird because the first topic is supposed to be on the existence of God. It seems weird to be like take your position that it is not the case. The only arguments, almost every argument for atheism is what we consider defense. Remember in the concept documents, that's arguments that attack your opponent's position. Can't really prove a negative, with one exception, and I think that argument is tenuous at best. It's my position that the only evidence of absence is an absence of evidence. That's the only way you could possibly know that something's not real. That sounds ridiculous, but like I ask you, how do you know that there's no such thing as leprechauns? Like for real, why do you think that? It's because there's never been evidence of it. There's an absence of evidence when there would have been evidence if they had existed. And not just in the abstract of like, okay, if there's no evidence, therefore it's not real, but evidence where there ought to have been is proof of absence. And there are many instances with God claims where no, we would have seen there should have been evidence by now, with the exception of like a deistic God. But that's the closest I think you can get to a positive argument for a non-existence of God. So it's kind of weird to start with Matt. You should probably start with the proponent, the person who wants to claim that God is real. This is this is like kind of a tenet of debate. You go in making no assumptions, and so if someone says something is the case, you say no, it's not, and that's the default. That's what we ought to be saying here. And so Daniel ought to be speaking first.
first of the
It's not a big
basic
deal.
topics
Matt's experienced
is
enough where
there
he can handle
evidence
speaking
of
first,
God?
and he knows what
Um,
to talk about.
and by that, for me, as we saw a little bit in the previous debate, is objective, verifiable facts that are consistent with a proposition. I promise I'm not going to go through everything that we went through in the previous debate,
Oh,
but there's a
this is
reason why
based on the
we look
previous one?
for objective, verifiable facts, and that's because subjective, unverifiable suspicions just aren't a reliable path to truth.
This is a great start. He's making very good use of the fact that he's speaking first by setting the criteria for by which we ought to approach things. Since he is not in contrast with an opponent yet, it's reasonable to present this, and it's not argumentative, right? You're just simply presenting it. There being no mechanism by which anyone has proposed we can determine things are true or not, but it allows him to say outright um, that just because you heard a voice in your head doesn't mean that came from a god. Like we need something that's verifiable, and yeah, I don't know. It's just very good use of his position of speaking first.
If there's a better way to get to a reliable understanding of reality,
And that
so
doesn't mean a scientific
demonstrated,
demonstration, by the way.
I'm seeking
It just needs to be
objective,
verifiable in
facts.
some way.
It is the most scientific, reliable path to truth, or the most consistently reliable, demonstrable path to an accurate model of reality is tied up in empirical, objective, verifiable facts. That doesn't mean it applies to absolutely everything. If I say life is generally preferable to death, that doesn't mean that that is an objectively verifiable empirical fact. It may just be my foundation that I use for things. If your God doesn't interact with reality in a detectable way, then you cannot claim to have detected it. You must show a mechanism by which you have detected what appears to be the undetectable. There's a reason that...
This is another great, like, making it seem like you can make a positive case for non-existence, but this is ultimately defense. Like, it is a defense argument that is masquerading as offense. What I mean by that is he's saying, like, okay, if you can't demonstrate it, then we cannot, like, then we have no reason to believe it's true. That is ultimately defense and assuming the lack of evidence from the other side, which he could demonstrate if the other side had spoken first, but since they haven't, we have not yet heard evidence for a position. He is simply codifying the default position as non-belief, which makes sense.
Courtrooms, at least in most of the modern world, no longer accept spectral evidence of magic and things like that. Because
that was my if anyone's seen Rashomon, that was the part I had the most difficulty with, was like, hold on, you're just like taking spiritual evidence as real, like it's more reasonable in the context that they're talking about, but from the modern day, I'm just like, what the hell is this, like, witch doctor doing here, giving evidence or testifying?
We want evidence for that claim. We must demonstrate a connection between our proposed explanation.
Great movie though, Rashomon.
And the facts that support that. Science doesn't make proclamations of certainty.
That's correct.
Not absolute certainty. I don't even think that it makes approximations to certainty. Science creates models that are the best representation of a construct that describe the available facts. It's important that people understand a couple of...
There are some things in science, I thought he was going to say it, so I wanted to give him space. There are some things in science that have been, like, so repeatedly demonstrated that the ability for them to be disproven, for their certainty to be called into question is bordering on the absurd, would be absurd, but it is still technically possible. Like things like laws of thermodynamics. It's one of those, like, it's point 0.00000, like, with millions of zeros before the 1% chance that it's wrong. Understanding that is not absolute certainty is useful, but, like, for the most part, like, by any reasonable metric, that is certain. But I'm quibbling here. Matt is generally correct.
Basic things about logical arguments and logical fallacies. The easiest way to look at it is to look at a simple syllogism. It's constructed of two premises, and you reach a conclusion. You have a major and minor premise and a connecting term, and that's how you say something like obvious, like Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal.
The syllogism people use as an
Fallacies
example.
come in a couple different forms. One of them are structural fallacies that get to the...
And notice he's not making arguments. He's merely constructing, like, how we should approach things, because he has nothing to argue against, and his position can only be to argue against.
There are informal fallacies too that get...
So he's using his time, like, he's still making very good use of his time. He's still getting value out of it, but it's to lay a foundation of, like, how we should approach things. We need to approach things logically. We need to approach things that we need to engage ourselves with the demonstrable, and, here are fallacies we should avoid. basically to preempt, and he's doing it in a really smart way. He's not accusing his opponent of doing these, like we saw. I think it was the last Flat Earther we watched do, where he was like, my opponent's definitely going to do these things. He's not saying that. He's just like, hey, these are things we shouldn't do, and like my opponent probably agrees with me, and like consciously he probably does, but he's also almost certainly going to engage in these fallacies. So he's laying out in advance the reasonableness of calling into question or taking issue with what Daniel is likely to say, in a context where, like, if Daniel has a problem with it, he has to argue in reference to this opening, and Matt doesn't have to lay out what he means by what he's talking about while he's literally arguing with Daniel, and they're doing a back and forth, you know.
Whether or not the premises are structured in such a way that they can reliably be used in a properly constructed. There's a difference between validity and soundness. Go look up validity versus soundness on Wikipedia. It's a decent start. Just every time you go to Wikipedia, make sure you go to the bottom and look to where it links you, because you might find yourself on like the Princeton philosophy page and in over your head if you haven't looked into any of this, and yet that's one of the best places to go to get information. So you might have some fallacies with names like post hoc ergo propter hoc, which just means after this, therefore because of this.
This is a big one, and it's a great example for him to use. Religious style thinking does this a lot, where they'll say, I prayed, then that thing happened, therefore it was caused by that thing, but was it? Maybe that thing was just going to happen anyway. This happens a lot when people pray for things that are exceptionally likely, and it's extremely memorable when they pray for things that are exceptionally unlikely and they happen. But they pay no attention to the instances where something is exceptionally unlikely and their prayer does nothing, or when something is exceptionally likely, they pray for something else. And I guess I've said the same thing twice. Yeah. So it's a great example to use here because there's a lot of that.
Say, hey, I had my breakfast and then I had diarrhea, therefore my breakfast caused diarrhea. It could have been something else. It's not just true that this one thing follows another, that was the cause.
Exactly.
Similarly, you might have something like an argumentum ad populum, which just means you're appealing to the popularity of the idea or what the masses think.
This happens sometimes when people will say, like, oh, if, like, the God claim wasn't true, why has it been believed by the majority of people throughout time? I don't know, because people can be wrong about stuff? Is that really that weird?
It's not impacted in any way by what people think or how strongly they are convinced of it or how long they've done it or how many of them there are. But a fallacy does not mean that the conclusion you've reached is false. That would be the fallacy to assert that something is false because it's fallacious.
It's not necessarily false, but you have not demonstrated the truthfulness of it. He's got a good point, but introducing the fallacy I think is kind of an issue, because pointing out religious fallacies is sometimes met with the argument of, like, with the statement, oh, it's the fallacy. It's like, well, no, I'm just arguing that you haven't demonstrated your position, which is the thing you're required to do here.
You cannot reliably...
it's not a big deal, but... He's
right.
This is a fallacy.
Be convinced that it's true because it does not follow from the facts.
So to use this example, like if you eat breakfast and then you have stomach problems later in the day, it would be a fallacy to say that was because of your breakfast, but it would also be a fallacy to say that, well, that's a fallacy, therefore it is not the case that it was caused by my breakfast. It might have been, but you haven't demonstrated that in saying it happened after.
From the premises. And there are a number of different arguments for the existence of God, some of which are ones where they attempt to support it by evidence.
I haven't found a single one that isn't fallacious.
It's a philosophical argument, and we're going to look at a couple.
And we can go over that at some point if people are interested.
What you've heard many times from people are things like, oh, if there's a painting, we know there's a painter. Or arguments from design and teleological arguments and anthropic principles. And the thing is...
And that's also not true, by the way. Like, even with that example, you can imagine a canvas that is laying on the ground, there's an earthquake, a bunch of buckets of paint spill onto it. You there have, like, abstract art, whatever. It's a painting. Was there a painter? No. There just wasn't. The canvas doesn't even have to be on the ground. Just imagine there's an art store. There's a huge earthquake. The canvas falls on the ground. Some paint falls on top of it, busting open, splattering some ink on it. Boom, you have abstract art. No painter. And additionally, things that people are talking about with that are things that they always use examples of something that we can determine to have been created by contrast to the natural world, and then say therefore the natural world is created. It was like, well, no, we only can know that things like watches and paintings are creative because they are distinct from the natural world, which are uncreated.
It doesn't matter in a logical argument if the premises are actually true as much as whether or not you accept that they're true. Because if you accept that the premises are true and the logic is valid and the argument's valid in structure, and you reject the conclusion, you are irrational. You are unreasonable.
So I get what he's doing here. Technically, he's incorrect. It would say you are engaging in irrationality or you are being irrational. I don't like the essentialization to the person, but it's useful to do here because remember, he's not trying to be technically correct. He's trying to debate, put on a show, win hearts and minds, and it is far more persuasive to say like, look, if you're doing this, you are being irrational, and you don't want to be irrational, do you? It's a tiny bit dishonest, but I understand what the purpose is. Like, I don't impugn him for it.
Or in conflict with the basics of logical reasoning. So it'd be nice if we had true premises because a valid.
Alternatively, as opposed to saying as opposed to the implication being, hey, you don't want to be irrational, do you? He would probably put it. It's more accurate to what he's trying to say. Probably to say, you likely value rationality, and rationality to be rational is to engage rationally with these arguments, and by doing what he just described, you are not doing that. He's appealing to your value of rationality.
Argument is one where true premises necessarily lead to a true conclusion, but at a minimum, if you accept the premises and reject the conclusion, you're in a position of being irrational or unreasonable.
This is why things like the Kalam cosmological argument, which I'm not going to get into right now, are hugely popular with apologists, religious apologists, because it appears to be a deductive argument, and each step they think is clear and makes perfect sense, and how could you really question this premise? But the conclusion is that God exists, so like obviously their atheist is being irrational by rejecting it. Now, of course, atheists do take issue with the premises, but they are also kind of designed to be difficult to argue with, even though they're clearly wrong. It's just they're phrased in weird ways where like you kind of have to argue with the underlying assumptions.
Using an invalid form. There's a number of different categories of arguments, but
C is very good. I'm going to finish this so quickly.
I have a claim about something in reality.
I think I put too much tea. Not for the purpose of like it being too strong. I like really strong tea, but I think in terms of wastefulness. But I was so bothered by that one cup I made that was just god awful because I didn't put enough tea. That I think I've been putting too much recently.
With the facts of reality, or it doesn't. And it may match up, and I won't have any way to demonstrate it. But when we're evaluating the evidence for a claim, you have to evaluate the facts that seem to be consistent with your proposition, and you also have to account for. And he's
again laying the groundwork. This whole opening is just laying the groundwork for how should we approach claims, and I think it's a really smart use of this time.
If there is a God and he created grass, some people might look at the grass and say, every blade of grass is proof of the creator.
And people do say that.
No, it's not. Because if there's not a God, or that's not the right God, if pixies created grass, or if evolution is the explanation for why we have grass, then the grass is evidence for each of those equally, which means it's evidence for none of them until you can demonstrate why it is connected to one and not the others.
In a way, it's a form of a circular argument, basically saying like, if there's a God, he created grass, therefore grass proves God, but like that's only true if you assume the truth of the conclusion. It's kind of doing it's indirect. It's doing an if then backwards. So this is a thing from symbolic logic. Logic, if then. So symbolic logic is really really interesting, and I would encourage people to look into it. But symbolic logic basically turns a lot of deductive arguments into math, and it is incredibly effective. This is also the basis for a lot of computing. Modern computing is based on Boolean logic. But the if then is demonstrated here. Like, if A then B, a fallacy is doing it backwards. If say, like, okay, if A then B, that means if any case, so if A is true, B must be true. Cool. It would be incorrect to say if B is true, then A is true. B can be true with A being false. In a situation like this, it would have to be if and only if, but uh, A then B, but you have to demonstrate the and only if. So that's what the blades of grass argument is doing. Some logic, by the way, very very interesting. I found it um, truly intriguing, but I know a lot of people don't like it because it is very mathematical. But it made a
If
lot of
you're
sense to me.
accused of a crime and you wind up in a courtroom, quite often they'll ask about, they'll try to demonstrate that you have motive, means, and opportunity. And so if we were to evaluate God, and we'll probably get into definitions about
This isn't
God
a great
a
paradigm,
little
by
bit
the
later,
way,
but
because motive,
generally
means, and opportunity doesn't prove for sure, right? It just um, it makes it possible, right? Those are all necessary conditions, but even in combination, they are not sufficient. So I don't like him using this as, well, if you can demonstrate this, that's good enough. But it would be useful to say, well, you can't even demonstrate this, and these are necessary conditions.
speaking, God is being accused of existing, and I'm finding God not guilty. Actually, I
This is
don't think the
also a
district
good.
attorney should bring the case anyway because we haven't established that the case is worth trying.
But that's also a good framing of by saying like we're accusing God of existing, and so he is merely acting as the defense to say no, not true. You don't have to prove that your client didn't do it. You have to prove you just have to show that they can't be proven to have done it. Like great, again, good phrasing. Positioning himself as the mere negation position, which is appropriate for the atheist position.
Because in order to have a hypothesis, it needs to be testable, which means it also needs to be falsifiable. There needs to be some way to demonstrate that it is wrong, at least hypothetically. You would need to show that God should be considered as a candidate explanation for whatever it is that you're trying to use God
that
as
it's
a
even
candidate
possible.
explanation for. And why are you
Let
picking
alone that
God
it's
as a candidate
the case.
explanation over pixies or over evolution? Once you've demonstrated that God's a candidate explanation, you need to show that it is consistent with all of the available facts and not inconsistent with the facts that would seem to contravene it. You have to show that the preponderance of evidence is consistent with and makes your hypothesis not just more likely than some other, but more likely than not, more probable than not. And then you have an evidence-based conclusion. There are a number of things that people believe. Ghost stories.
And this is why I found it very interesting. What he's about to get to is what I find very interesting about the prospect of watching different religious people argue. Like I couldn't, I don't, I've seen it happen, and I still couldn't imagine what it would look like for a Jew and a Christian to argue the truth of their religion to each other, because they're both founded on the same kind of thinking. They just choose to reject some claims and not others. But it's not really, well, I guess with the Jews and Christians it's a little different because there's one specific claim that they're really arguing the truthfulness of. But like for example, like a Hindu and a Muslim trying to argue the truth of their religious positions against each other, how could you possibly do that? People have all sorts of nonsense beliefs, but I don't know, the religious believer chooses to believe one of those ridiculous beliefs and not the others based on what? Like by what mechanism could you determine that the Abrahamic God is more reasonable to believe in than the Hindu pantheon? Is there really anything about it that's more reasonable? No, not really. So how do you pick that belief out of the others? And it's more difficult between the different Abrahamic religions, especially between Islam and Christianity, because unlike with Judaism where it just rejects the newer claims, both of them make a newer claim that is based on exactly as little, you know.
Old wives' tales, the Farmer's Almanac. And all sorts of people believe that they have strong evidence for it because they go through a
Oh, that tea
process
was so
of
good.
prioritizing
Probably too good because we
evidence.
finished
If
it
you think that the Bible or
record
the
time here.
Quran is the ultimate foundation of truth and that what's in there is going to lead you to truth, or that it's more likely to be true than not, that will bias your ability to assess the information as to whether or not it's consistent with that.
Also, Matt is being extremely fair to his opponent here by making it clear that you do not have to demonstrate beyond any possible doubt. You don't have to prove definitively, conclusively, deductively, but it needs to at least be more likely than not. And he has the understanding that his opponent can't do that either. But he is being extremely fair, and that I hope is being noticed by the audience.
If I'm on trial for murder and they can't produce a body, they might still be able to convict me. If they can't produce a weapon, they might still be able to convict me. They could show that I have means, motive, and opportunity, and I might still be innocent, and they might not be able to convict
Oh,
me.
okay.
Because means, motive, and opportunity are only part.
Oh, that's great. Okay,
Evidence
fantastic.
for this.
So the thing I was worried about before, about him not making clear that means, motive, and opportunity are merely necessary conditions and not even in conjunction sufficient. Great, he's doing that now. This is a phenomenal opening.
Comes to God, there's no demonstration.
Even though he's
that I'm
not really
aware of,
arguing for his position
maybe we'll
because
hear
he
one,
can't.
that God is a
He's
candidate
speaking first as the
explanation
negation.
for anything. There is an assertion that God has the means to do whatever he wants by claiming that he's omnipotent or all-powerful or at least sufficiently powerful.
And by the
Where's
way,
the
there are
demonstration that God
internal
exists
problems
and is
with
all-powerful?
omniscience and
So the means is an assertion that's unjustified
omnipotence.
as far as I can tell. The motive seems to largely be ignored. I don't know why any God would create anything, certainly not anything inferior. Why would it create flawed things? And by making God spaceless and timeless, they're going to give him the opportunity. But these are assertions that aren't supported by evidence.
Yeah, and as a note, these are also not claimed by religious texts. These are things invented after the fact to solve the problems that exist with the belief. This is like, I think this is something I kind of wish was harped on a little bit more when atheists debate with theists, to say like, it's not like any religious text says God is all powerful, but you have to believe that, or that God is spaceless and timeless, but you have to believe that because of all of the objections raised to the God belief by atheists over the years. And so now it's taken as like an assumptive proof. This is part of why you can't, even what I was saying about absence of evidence being the only evidence of absence is actually not a fully workable argument, because a God does not have to be all powerful or all knowing or all good or spaceless or timeless. That is not necessary to be a God. But those attributes become necessary when theists are arguing against the other issues that exist with that. If a God is spatial, for example, then where is he? Right? Why can't we find the guy? Why can't we climb Olympus and meet with the gods? Well, so then suddenly, we've solved this problem by making him spaceless, but you have no evidence for that. The only evidence is that it definitely doesn't make sense if gods are spatial, but you don't know that they are spaceless. You just are avoiding one problem by inventing new attributes. And this happens. I feel like this is something that could be harped on more.
You can make philosophical arguments. You can keep things
in fact,
the
even in
realm
the
of
Abrahamic religions, in the Garden of Eden story, it says that God was walking through the garden in the cool of the day. God was very much spatial in that story. Now, you can take that story as an allegory, which I think is reasonable. But if you take it as any sort of literal, then, or at the very least as an indication of what seems it is possible for God to do, then God is not spaceless always. And one must wonder, well, then where is he? Why has he never been spatial when we've been looking?
Actions, but when we're looking for objective,
and of course, if someone were to claim they were God, if someone were to walk up to you and tell you that they were God, would you believe them? No. Why not? Especially if you're a religious believer. Really ask yourself, why wouldn't you believe someone if they walked up to you and told you that they were God? How else would God do it? And if it's impossible to you, or if it seems less likely that they're God than that they're lying or mistaken, then why do you believe all these other claims? Because these are also less likely than the people who, having written them, believing something that was not true.
Facts of reality that are not just consistent with a God, but consistent with a particular God and no others. No other pixies, no other nothing, no evolutionary thing.
This is why I think deism is kind of a popular, by the way, is that can posit the existence of a God that does not have to be all-knowing, does not have to be spaceless and timeless, doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be all-powerful, has merely to be able to have created the universe. That's the only thing it needs to be able to do. And then to have walked away. Or even have died. For real, you could be a deist and believe in a dead God. Because the deistic belief, as I understand it, is that there was a God that created the universe and simply allowed it to run thereafter. Didn't participated no more. Well, you can believe in a dead God in that point, and they don't have to be spaceless or timeless or all powerful or any of those things, or even still around.
Aware of many things that people point to and say this is evidence that is consistent with a God, but correlation with an idea does not demonstrate that there is in fact causation. It doesn't demonstrate that. Oh, there's my time.
Oh, but
See?
Unfortunate.
I was watching my 10 minutes.
Given
I didn't hear James say a thing.
Given that he seems to have like had this planned out pretty well, like there was a clear flow and direction. He wasn't just, you know, trying to ad lib what the next thing to say was. I'm a little surprised he hit his time there. You would think that he should practice it and make sure it's within time. Maybe that's just like a tendency I have because of competitive debate. Maybe other people don't do this. Or maybe he estimated that's probably about 10 minutes, even though it's closer to like 11 or something. I don't know.
In any case, I'll wrap up here with I'm unaware of any objectively verifiable evidence for any God whatsoever. I'm interested to hear both a definition of a God and the objectively verifiable evidence.
That's something, by the way, that people skip, and also why it's impossible to argue one theist to the next. You're unlikely to find two theists with the same idea of what God is, and so you can disprove Daniel's God, for example, but that you wouldn't have necessarily disproven the God of the next Muslim, you know, the person standing next to him who's also Muslim, because he might believe in a different conception. People have very, very different conceptions of God, even though they act like they're the same. Even what they mean by spaceless, timeless, all-powerful, so on and so forth is very different. All good, by the way, is where that becomes exceptionally true. No two people are going to have the same idea of what being perfectly good as a god would even mean. Especially like Daniel, who would think that like imposing order and duty would be the ultimate good, where someone like me would think like engendering well-being and happiness would be an ultimate good. You know, that's very, very different ideas. So asking his opponent to define what he means by God is very good. His opponent, Daniel's likely to just point to like the God as described by Muslim texts, but that doesn't actually define it. That says maybe it's defined elsewhere. It doesn't tell me what a definition is. We'll see what he actually does, but that's what I expect to happen.
Opening, Matt. And if you're watching at home,
okay.
Daniel.
The light doesn't.
Thanks very much, Daniel. The floor.
I wasn't sure if he was gonna like plug a bunch of stuff like he does sometimes.
Light doesn't need to be on.
Glad you said that.
Dark in the.
You're saying it doesn't need to be on.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, messing with lights. All right, we did it.
And
Now the lighting is just inconsistent because Matt isn't lit the same way, or it doesn't look like he is. Daniel, you good, bro? You pulling up a different PowerPoint? Oh, there we go. It's a little quiet. Let me turn it
The
up.
debate today is whether Islam is true. We've divided the
it is whether there is a God, but
into three sections or three parts. Is there good evidence for God? Is there any religion more compelling than Islam? And which is best?
Is that the second debate topic? That sounds like a permutation. Because I don't think that Matt would agree that there is a religion more compelling than Islam. Maybe he would, but like that's not necessarily the case for an atheist. That sounds like a permutation. That's likely an issue for the next debate, but that is redefining the resolution in a way that does not have the same meaning, and I take issue with that.
Society, secular humanism, or Islam? Debating these questions will allow us to answer the overarching question, is Islam true? First, is there good evidence for God? What kind of evidence is compelling evidence? When we ask, is there compelling evidence for God, we should also ask, compelling for whom?
Okay, well, I was going to say this is interesting because he is addressing, he had intended to say something that actually addresses directly what Matt ended up saying in his opening, and obviously he didn't know this, like he wrote it in advance, or maybe they exchanged notes or whatever. It's still nice to have a like, okay, now we'll see a competing position on what should be compelling. It is very weird that he leads into compelling for who. That's really weird. We'll see what he says, but that sounds like he's about to engage in some like very direct ad hominem of like, it's compelling for me, the rational religious person, but you crazy atheist just can't understand it. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's not where he's going, but that sounds like he's about to lead into it.
How do we decide what is or isn't compelling? It depends on the audience. If we were to ask 11th century Europeans if they found the existence of God
Yeah,
compelling,
okay.
virtually all of them would say yes. But if we asked 21st century Europeans, far fewer would say yes. So what's changed? Atheists claim people have just become smarter, more scientific, more in touch with reality. That's the atheist narrative.
Yep, there it is. He actually is saying exactly what I was saying. He's doing it differently, but yeah, he's saying exactly what I was going to. It's compelling to the religious and intelligent people, but now these crazy atheists have muddled the minds of people, and it's no longer compelling. It's not that my arguments are bad. It's just that you're too wacky and atheist to believe the truth anymore. Yeah.
I want to propose a competing narrative.
Literally an
Cognitive science says that human beings have natural intuitions, whether they're moral, religious, aesthetic, logical, or mathematical intuitions. Intuitions are mostly unconscious, and they're based on the feeling of compellingness rather than systematic proof. For example, people have the intuition.
Also, this fixation with the word compelling, I don't believe that was in the stated resolution, the stated topic. I don't even think Matt used it all that much, but he's going with compelling because it has a meaningful difference to using a word like, is there good reason to believe in God? The difference, of course, is that compelling implies more persuasiveness than something like, is there good reason to believe in God, which would imply more, is there logical sound, like, can you demonstrate it rationally, as opposed to can you convince somebody? Because those are two very different questions, but he's fixated on the persuasiveness question. Can this be persuasive? Which is not at all what we're trying to talk about. It's a distraction.
That harming others for no reason is wrong. This is an intuition because people might not even have articulated this as a concrete belief, and they have no logical justification for it. But
well, there
they still
is,
strongly
but that's okay.
tend to accept it as true.
No,
psychologists have shown
there is
that
logical justification for it. He just ignores it when it's told to him because it's a real problem for his philosophy for people to say, to have reasons to think that hurting people for no reason is bad. He likes doing that. So no, there are good reasons.
All children naturally develop this moral intuition earlier in life. Beyond moral intuitions, there's also aesthetic intuitions. Humans universally experience disgust at the thought of eating human flesh. There are also logical intuitions. We all intuitively accept the law of non-contradiction.
By the way, a lot of these things are just the nature of evolving as social animals. It doesn't make them wrong or right, but like there are reasons for this. It's not like this came out of nowhere. He's making it seem like frivolous, but
that two contradictory statements cannot both be true at the same time. And we also have mathematical intuitions, like 5 objects is more than 1 object. There are also intuitions about the world and history.
We can also demonstrate some of these things, by the way, like the law of non-contradiction. We can demonstrate that contradictory statements cannot be true at the same time, right? If I say that, 10 feet from me it is raining, and also 10 feet from me it is not raining, or I guess 10 feet from me would, like, if they're in different directions, that can be the case. But like, if I like give you coordinates to a specific point on Earth, and I say in that spot it is both raining and not raining, we can demonstrate that those two things are not both true.
For example, we all intuitively believe that there's an external world that persists even if we're not in it. We also intuitively believe that the past was real and our memories are based on that past reality. We also have natural intuitions about God. Most people
that is not true, by the way. We have natural intuitions about spirits and stuff like that, but in the last several thousand years, it has been more the vast majority of people were raised with the concept of God available to them. Prior to that, there were animistic religions that believed like there were wind spirits and water spirits. You even see a little bit of that in like Shintoism, like objects and forces of nature have spirits uh, that are at work or at play or whatever. That is not the same thing as a god, and it is definitely not an intuition that there is such a thing as a god. That is a derivation of the human propensity towards false positives. We've been over this before, but right, like you hear rustling in the grass on the savannah. If you assume it's a tiger and you run away, but it's not, well, nothing really bad happens to you. You just ran away, right? But if you assume it's, and that would be a false positive. But if you assume it's not, I guess there aren't tigers in the savannah. A lion, I guess, would be the right thing. But if you assume it's a lion, you assume it's not a lion and it's just the wind rustling, and you're wrong, you're lunch. So, like there is an evolutionary advantage to preferring false positives to false negatives, and so now you get to the point of like, okay, the wind is blowing, the wind is rustling the grass. That must be, a spirit intentionally doing that, right? That would be a similar kind of false positive, that there's an agent at play. But this is not like an intuition towards believing that there is a god, let alone a singular god, let alone one with the specific attributes of being spaceless, timeless, all powerful, omnipotent, yada yada. I just said the same thing twice, but let alone from all of that, that it's the Muslim god. That is not an intuitive belief that people have.
The world and in history believe in spirit beings. According to
Spirit
cognitive
beings,
science,
but that's
this belief
not
is
the same.
biologically rooted.
Yes, spirit beings is
Research
not the same
shows
thing
that
as
children
gods.
as young as 5 across diverse cultures all express similar beliefs that the universe was created by the supernatural. This is the case even for
The supernatural
children
is
in
not the same
cultures
thing as
that
gods,
don't
by the way.
affirm a creator god.
A great way of explaining this is like, of why a spirit is not the same thing as a god, is that like if you imagine the reality of fairies or pixies, these would be mythical creatures, and perhaps they have some amount of like supernatural sway, like they often can do magic or whatever, but you would not call them gods. It would be weird to pray to them. It is relevantly different to believe in like spirits or whatever, but then you have a progression over time. I don't know to what extent Shintoism considers like the kami that are in objects and forces. Or I don't know to what extent those are like gods, so I don't want to speak to the existence of gods in that religion. Um, but I know in like these animistic ones, it is not the same thing as a god.
Like Japanese children. This shows that the
Oh, he's going
intuition
to talk about
believe
it.
that the universe was created by supernatural beings is inbuilt. People also naturally believe that the mind persists after bodily death. Belief in the afterlife is a biologically rooted intuition.
So it's an intuition, but that doesn't make it true, remember? Like, and he's conflating these with things like, the belief in harming someone for no reason being wrong. Like, it is a similarly true intuition, but also our intuitions can be false, and he's not entertaining that idea whatsoever.
All this natural theology. So to recap, humans have many natural intuitions about what is true. When we rely on those intuitions, that is called intuitive thinking.
Well, it's called intuition, but it's not considered a reliable avenue for which we can derive truth. There are lots of intuitions people have that are simply false. If you were to make the statement that every intuition a person has is correct, you would very quickly find yourself agreeing with statements that could not possibly be true. But of course, he's not saying that out loud. He's only implying it. This is the dishonesty that we've seen a lot before in Daniel's argumentation style. Is the thing that is obviously false is merely implied, and he would disagree with it if it were said outright. But without that assumption, none of this makes any sense.
A good way to think about intuitive thinking is like a tendency to find something plausible or true.
Like, at a minimum, you could just say, like, oh, it's my intuition that Islam is false. Now what? Now what? For real, now what?
If I tell you the world doesn't go away when you close your eyes, most people will tend to believe me, even if I don't present some elaborate argument. The idea just has this inherent plausibility.
And he actually couldn't reconcile with the fact that a lot of non-believers have never had the feeling of intuitive existence of a god. That's something I struggled with for a long time, is being raised around a lot of religious people, understanding that I do not have faith like they did. I just didn't really feel that belief in the same way. I didn't have this intuition that there was a god. So now what? You've been implying, Daniel, that there's a truth to intuitive thinking, and that the fact that people intuitively believe in gods means there must be gods. Well, I intuitively don't. You you can't really argue against well, maybe some people will argue against the truth of that intuition, that maybe I'm lying to you. Presuppositionalists will do this. I haven't heard Daniel make an argument like that. Maybe he would. Uh, but he can't argue that like my intuition is correct, because that completely collapses the conclusion of his argument. But he also can't argue that it's incorrect, because that collapses the premise, which is that these intuitive thoughts have some bearing on what is true, or there is some truthfulness to the things that we intuitively believe.
Because of our human psychology. Now, there's another mode of thinking which is called analytic thinking. Analytic thinking is
And
different.
it is a bold position, if he's about to, which I think he is, to claim that intuitive thinking is preferential, is ought to be preferred to analytic thinking. He's an anti-rationalist, so like he's railed against analytic thinking before, and I'm sure he's about to like make up a bunch of shit about what analytic thinking is like that is completely dishonest and inaccurate. But who is it bold to be like, listen, man, logic is for squares. I just intuit things, and that makes me right and cool, actually.
It causes us to question our intuitions rather than just accept things because they feel compelling.
Yeah, why should
demand
we?
further evidence and justification. In other words, analytic thinking is about doubt. We doubt our intuitions, and then we explore other possibilities. We gather evidence. We make inferences. We might intuitively feel that eating human flesh is disgusting, but is it actually wrong? Well, let's just gather data and evaluate.
Yeah, so this is where he's implying that like analytic thinking will argue for the benefits of cannibalism, which is of course not the case. But it does ask the question of like, why is cannibalism wrong? It has good answers to that, by the way, so that we understand things for reasons and not just because we feel them in our gut.
Arguments for each side. This is analytic thinking overcoming intuitive thinking. Both intuitive and analytic thinking are found in human beings, but they're balanced in different ways in different societies. Research shows that intuitive thinking is dominant in some societies and analytic thinking is dominant in others.
Okay.
The other important thing is that when you engage in more analytic thinking, you start doubting more and more of your
Yeah, and that's a good thing, by the way, that you start doubting more and more of your intuitions. I don't know why YouTube is
intuitions.
lagging out here.
This is studied in dual process theory. People who
This is
have
completely
maximized
irrelevant,
their
by the way.
analytic thinking will doubt their religious, moral, and aesthetic intuitions.
Yep.
Only
The more logically you think about the world, the less compelling religiosity is. You're making the atheist case for us, but he almost certainly is going to reject analytic thinking shortly. So this isn't actually an argument in favor of an atheist position.
strongest intuitions remain. For example, their intuitions about logic or about the external world.
Logic
But
is
for
not intuitive, by the way. It's built analytically.
everything else, they demand empirical
There are
evidence.
axioms
But there
for
is
sure,
no
because
empirical
you can't
evidence
ever
for
prove
these
anything
things.
definitively.
So when you
but-
maximize analytic thinking, people become more and more inclined to a reductionist view of the world
Yeah,
defined
there it
by
is.
scientific
Here's-
materialism, and anything
Yep.
beyond
Here's
that
the getting
is
angry
doubted.
at the concept of
Now let's bring it all
analysis.
back. When we have a debate about good evidence for God, what are our standards? Are we trying to meet the standards of a maximally analytic mode of thinking, the type of extreme analytic thinking of atheists? Why should we? Why
Yeah,
should we
yeah,
just
literally rejecting the concept of rationality. This debate can be done right now, right? It's clear, right? What else do we have to talk about? He rejects the concept of rationality. What arguments are valuable? We're just going off of intuition. By the way, Daniel, it's my intuition that you are almost certainly an abusive partner. Do you want to go with that intuition? Like, obviously he's not watching this, but like, I unironically do believe he would be an abusive person to have a relationship with, and it would be better for any involved to just not date or marry him. He seems like he would be an awful, awful person. That's my intuition. Do you want to just buy that and that's just true now, Daniel? Or is there like a logical reason why we can reject that? Like maybe you've never had like domestic abuse cases filed against you or whatever.
accept that standard of evidence as opposed to a more balanced type of cognition that doesn't nuke all our natural human intuitions? What atheists will want to claim here is that we should obviously prefer the maximally analytic mode of thinking.
It's
Why?
the only
Because
one, by
that's
the
the
way. Analytic thinking is the only mode of thinking presented here that is amenable to to like consideration. Like intuitive analysis, intuitive thinking just is right. It's just your intuition. It's more or less thoughtless, right? It is the only one that you can't. So with analytic thinking, that's the only thing that you can really interrogate. You can really see, like, you can check to see the accuracy of it. You have to use analytic thinking to do that, but you can check to see if, like, your thought processes line up with how the world is. With intuition, like, people believe all sorts of shit intuitively, and they're wrong. And Daniel, you know that because most people on Earth are not Muslim. Intuitively, if their belief is intuitive, you are wrong about your religion.
mode of thinking that's most likely to give us the truth. But is this true? Does maximizing doubt bring us closer to the truth?
Yeah.
Why should we
Yes.
believe that? I would
Oh,
challenge
because it's
atheists
demonstrable.
to justify this.
Like,
Why should
oh, I mean, this is really easy to justify, right? Religious people were like, well, intuitively, it seems like the Earth is at the center of the universe. And then we investigate it even at all and demonstrate that's not the case. Now you have to start to ask him, like, Daniel, do you think the world is flat? Because you'd have to. Intuitively, it looks flat, but we can demonstrate that it's not very easily using analytical thinking. He's literally arguing against the concept of thinking beyond your gut reaction. The concept of reason he is arguing against right now, which isn't surprising to me that he is anti-rational. What is surprising to me is that he's saying it out loud in a debate.
we adopt such extreme epistemic standards? In reality, a psychology that balances intuitive and analytic thinking is more suitable for recognizing truth.
And by the way, this is his argument for the proof of God, that it's bad to be analytical. Well, I guess now he's saying balance, but, like, he's made no case for balance. He's made only the case that analytical thinking is bad. So this is the lip service he does. He does this constantly, where he'll rail against something for minutes and then say, like, we need to balance these things. No, he doesn't. Obviously, he doesn't believe that. Otherwise, he would talk about, like, the positives that come with it. But, like, his position for God is like, don't you, like, feel like it's true? Like, obviously we can't think about it rationally, because if you did, you would find it's not true, which is evidence that rationality is bad. So doesn't it feel like it's true? This is his argument, unironically, for the existence of God. Holy shit. Dumber than I remember.
Actually an insight that we find within the history of philosophy and the work of Western philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein. Not all of reality can be...
Oh, and by the way, some number of philosophers have attempted to argue rationally for the existence of God. That's what apologetics is as a field. So, like, no, it's not merely the domain of the intuition to believe in the existence of God. Which, I don't know. I feel like I'm making his case for him that you could potentially make arguments, rational arguments for existence of God, but it's more. This is kind of what I mean about the dangerousness of religion and religiosity. Like, it's not inherently bad to believe in God, like, all right, whatever, but that it compels you to be anti-rational, not merely irrational, but anti-rational, opposed to the concept of logic and thinking. This is a danger. That not only does he think it is better to be like that, but he is compelled to do so by his religiosity and compelled to encourage others to abandon rationality actively. That's a danger. That's real harm. And, for what it's worth, it is not all religions that are like this. Judaism, for example, places major emphasis on learning, on education, on learning better how to think about the world. It does not demand irrationality or anti-rationality. Instead, it encourages you to think about the world, to ask questions, to be better at asking questions. This is not what religions have to be like. But the domination that Daniel wants, and he wants to put through the lens of his religion, demand that you not think. You need to not think, listen to what he says, because he is right, and his will should be manifest.
Reduced to empirical data points to be scrutinized through systematic analysis. The reality is we all experience, the reality we all experience is far richer than that. And insisting on maximum analytic thinking actually takes us further from fully seeing reality, like covering up one half of our binoculars. Furthermore, the insistence on maximal analytic thinking
By the
is
way,
nothing
he
more.
does want to do the same thing in the binocular example. He's just not saying it out loud. He's merely letting the implication of his arguments do that work for him. This is why I think he also knows what he's doing. Like, it's too well designed an argument for him to accidentally be implying all of these things. I think he knows what's up. He's an exceptionally dangerous person for that reason, and this is also why I wanted to go over this. I think any instance in which he is platformed is irresponsible platforming. Worse still, when it's modern day debates, putting him in a position where he can spout his views to their audience, often uninterrupted, like there's opening statements or whatever. He's not here to be embarrassed, and he's likely not going to be, because someone like Matt is not here to. He's here to argue and debate, not to embarrass his opponent and make him look like garbage. This is why I take issue with modern day debate platforming this guy. He's dangerous. He knows what he's doing. He is actively making efforts to spread his vile positions, and he is being given the opportunity to spout his disgusting opinions to an audience more or less unchallenged. Like, he's being challenged in his arguments or whatever, but it's in a position where, like, he cannot be challenged fundamentally. He has given the mic too much.
More than a
He is
recent
made
product
to
of
appear
cultural
equal
evolution.
to
For
Matt
most of
Dillahunty
history, human
and
cognition was
whoever
more
else.
balanced. So what changed? Analytic thinking became dominant not because it's more attuned to the truth or because it's more beneficial for humanity. Analytic extremism became dominant because of what we can call cognitive colonialism. To understand how this happened,
This is, again, like, he does this a lot more than most right wingers do, but this happens a lot, by the way, is co-opting leftist language because it's popular, and misusing it in order to cloak their actual positions. Cognitive colonialism, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense.
consider society A that is analytic dominant versus society B that is intuitive dominant. Over time, both societies experience technological and economic growth, but society
Do they? Do they? We had a lot of religious thinking, which is what he's using as synecdoche for intuitive thinking, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the medieval times. And yeah, there was development, but it was called the Dark Ages for a reason. Very little comparatively was progressed as opposed to the times before and the times after. And it was the Renaissance that kickstarted progress once again. The Renaissance, by the way, that was rediscovering the logic of the past civilizations and codifying as ideas things like rationality. Rationality was one of the major precepts of the Enlightenment, and he's already railed against rationality, but he also is like an anti-Enlightenment type person. He would hate that kind of thing, and that's when the progress started.
A experiences this faster. This allows society A to dominate society B. Society A then imposes analytic thinking on its newly acquired subject.
Now he's just making up fan fiction. Like, why should it be the case that this happens? But the reason why it's the case is because he wants to argue that it's colonialism to prefer rationality to irrationality.
By establishing an analytic focused school system. In this way, analytic thinking spreads and dominates more and more society.
Oh, and by the way, like, Islam isn't always like this either. The scientific method was, if I'm not mistaken, invented in the golden age of Islam in the Middle East. I forget exactly where. It might have been in what is modern day Iraq, but I'm not exactly sure. But, like, the golden age of Islam, it was massively influential towards modern scientific and academic thinking. I don't remember all of the subjects. I know mathematics had a lot of there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of progress in the field of mathematics and in science. I don't remember what else. There was a very, very active time for intellectual development, and that was in the Muslim world. It was literally called the Golden Age of Islam.
Societies until it dominates the entire globe. The societies with the most extreme emphasis on analytic thinking win out. That's modern history in a nutshell. Researchers like Joseph Heinrich have explained this history in books like The Secret of Our Success.
So this is
Now,
again,
in
we've
fact,
seen this before with the flat earthers. They'll or oh no no not the flat earthers. We saw this before with the last Christian apologist that we saw, where he's not actually saying the thing, he's pointing to the thing existing somewhere, and we have to trust his interpretation of that, and that it exists, that his interpretation is correct, that so on and so
that
forth.
analytic thinking can accelerate technology and growth, that sounds like a great thing. But the big question
Well, he's
is,
also anti-technology.
just because
yeah.
analytic thinking excels at producing technology,
This guy, for real, wants to live in a technologically backwards feudal state where he is at the top, where everyone is subservient, no one is able to think because no one is educated. There's no he'll have access to the positives of modern technology because he's rich and powerful enough. He's the only person with power in this world. But everyone else has to slave away in poverty,
does that mean that
he's railed
maximizing
against
it is
we've
better
seen him
suited
rail
to
against
determine
technology
truth?
prior in the
I'm not
past.
claiming that analytic thinking has no connection to the truth, but again, when you maximize
I mean, you
this
are.
type of thinking, that means
And by the way, even that statement implies that he does, right? I'm not saying it has no connection to the truth. The reason why he's saying that is because he knows that's what he has been implying, and the implication is yeah, there's some, I guess, but clearly it doesn't have that much access to the truth. It's implying the thing he's actively saying the opposite of, and he knows that's what is going on, right?
means that your analytic capacities start overshadowing intuitions about the world that are also very compelling. Throughout history,
Notice again the use of the word compelling. Not true, they're compelling.
all peoples felt intuitively that there were moral, aesthetic, and religious truths about life and purpose.
People feel that way, but we can demonstrate the non-existence of aesthetic truths. Merely look at what is considered beautiful. Beautiful in different cultures throughout space and time. They're exceptionally different. Even in the same place at different times, right? Like we were talking about the medieval era. Back then, a woman being heavy was considered attractive because it meant you were rich and could afford to eat that much where you got fat. But now, well, I shouldn't say that's not the case, because a lot of people do consider larger women attractive because beauty standards are not objective. There is no aesthetic truth about what is attractive or what is beautiful. And I'm not saying that overweight women aren't beautiful. They are. Everyone can be, because beauty is subjective. And that is it's very easy to prove that these intuitions about aesthetic truth are false. It does not exist. But what he wants, I can, as I'm talking, I can realize what he wants to, the derivation of it. He wants his position on beauty to be the dominant one, and that to be considered the thing that is true. His intuition is the truth, is more or less what he's actually saying. Because it's not that intuition all points to his conclusion. That's not the case at all. But his intuition does, and we should prefer intuition, and for him, it's only his positions that matter,
And many of these truths were based on intuitions that were universally shared by all humanity.
They're not
Have you told
universally
all
shared,
these
by the
people
way.
that they have to reject their intuitions.
The possibility, I don't know how many, if there were actually cannibal tribes. I'm sure there's been at least one group of cannibals on the planet. That a group like that exists or has existed is evidence that there aren't universal truths that we all know and understand.
And adopt analytic extremism, which
Or
ultimately will bring
intuitively things that are associated with Islam, by the way, Daniel, like female genital mutilation, also known as female circumcision, are deeply wrong. How do you reckon with that? Intuitively, I know that's wrong. Well, you would say, well, we know that God is real, because of intuition, even though our intuitions disagree here. Therefore, we should believe in Islam, even though that doesn't make sense. And it says it's cool, even though I'm pretty sure it doesn't. Therefore it's okay. It's not about the truth of his positions. He does not care what's true. He cares only about the domination of his beliefs.
to doubt all these other intuitions, most people would not accept that. But unfortunately, people don't have a choice. The analytic mode of cognition has been imposed by cognitive colonialism.
Yep, there
Secular
we go.
humanist powers have implemented all manner of social and educational
Like, we can
programs
honestly
over the
just
course
ignore
of the
this
past
part.
300
He's
years to
just
champion
lying.
analytic thinking. Why? Because that's
This
the
is
type
just
of
like
thinking
to
that
appear the
maximizes
victim.
economic growth. The more people are thinking analytically, the more they produce science and technology, which will increase GDP. Atheists want
Also,
to tell us-
economic growth isn't merely like number go up. Economic growth often means that, or it can mean that people's lives are better, especially with the advent of technology. It is better that people don't have to. What's a good example of like an advent of? Oh, great example. The cotton gin decreased the demand for slave labor. It is so much better for the world that there's less slavery because of the existence of the cotton gin. Holy shit, it's so much better. But like, he hates technology. He also was probably cool with slavery, just not slavery the way Americans think of slavery. You know, it's I don't know who he would want to enslave, but I don't imagine it's black people writ large. It's probably has to do with like whether you're Muslim or not.
Story that the debate between atheism and religion is about two sides making arguments against each other, and people decide which is more compelling. But there's another way to look at it. Atheists represent an extremist mode of thinking that results in maximizing.
Notice again the shifting, like understanding that to people who are, well, less to people who are more left leaning, I guess is how I'll put it. Extremism is a big deal. It's a hell of an accusation. And he knows that he's a religious extremist, and not just a religious extremist, but a far right authoritarian extremist. He instead accuses his opponent of extremism of thought by being rational to deflect the charge before it can occur.
GDP and military power.
He does this all
the
the
reason
time.
that there are so many atheists today is not because the scientific worldview is inherently compelling. Rather, maximizing analytic thinking allows you to invent nukes and tanks. Most people historically
Notice what he just said. It allowed you to invent nukes and tanks. That's why you became an atheist. That doesn't even remotely make sense, even given what he's talked about so far. There's absolutely no reason why one would mean the other. Like, that doesn't make sense whatsoever. That's what you call a non sequitur. There's no reason why one would follow from the other, but he'll say it. But no, as it turns out, like, when people tend to be doing better economically, there tends to be less religiosity. Just a tendency. People seem to be more attached to religion the more desperate their situations. It's almost like it's the cry of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the opiate of the masses, so on and so forth. I know I'm paraphrasing that poorly.
disagreed with maximal analytic thinking, but they were wiped out. Social, technological, economic violence has changed the epistemology of people across the world.
Yeah, at this point, Matt, I agree with you. Like, look at he's not writing it. It's like, you're not saying anything. You're just like making shit up and screeching like atheism bad because technology bad because nuclear weapons exist. Okay.
No one would have taken
like for real. He's like atheism bad because nuclear weapons exist. Like. Okay.
Seriously, but atheists fail to acknowledge this history. They just assume that analytic thinking.
Like, and notice the ridiculousness, right? Like, he's presenting. Look at this slide, debating the atheist mind, but where's the evidence? As if that's a ridiculous question. Like, he's treating the insistence on proving your position as ridiculous. This is more honesty than I expected from him or from apologists generally. Normally, they argue that you can have rational arguments for the existence of God. Instead, he's just like, no, I'm anti-rationalist because rationality is bad. It's bad to want evidence to believe in things. I will say, I am impressed that he has managed to disappoint me even still. Even for as bad as an opinion I have had of him going into this, he has managed to limbo under that bar. Holy fuck.
To be maximized no matter what. This biases any debate on the existence of God. The theist is always at a disadvantage.
Because the theist is always at a disadvantage, because the atheist wants to use logic and reason, and the theist has to just be like, but my feelings, though. That puts me at a disadvantage. It's unfair. Or maybe your approach is wrong.
He has to
maybe
mold his
that's
arguments
evidence
to
of your
satisfy a
being
mind
incorrect.
that's primed to reject anything non-empirical. Humans have strong natural
What's wrong
intuitions
with
about
you
reality.
not
We have the
accepting
intuition that
things
there's
that
a
aren't
certain world, that our
empirical?
memories have truth content. There are intuitions that don't give us any more power to do science or produce technology.
Honestly, if I were in Matt's position, I would want to focus this entire debate on the fact that he's arguing against the concept of rationality. That he's opposed to the concept of reason. Make it all about that, and anytime he tries to argue with you, be like, dude, you're engaging in rationality. What's wrong with you? Intuitively, you're wrong. What the fuck is wrong with you?
But that doesn't make them unreal. Intuitions
You're
about the
being really
existence
atheist
of
right
God
now.
are among the strongest
Intuitively, you're
intuitions
wrong.
humans have, and this intuition is supported by inferential reasoning and communal traditions. If an atheist says he doesn't find these things compelling, we should ask, where do you get your epistemic standards from? Why shouldn't we believe that those standards
And
are
by the
unique?
way, like, notice the demand for basis for epistemic positions, which is kind of a nonsense, but like being placed on the atheist, but not on himself. He's just like, nah, intuition is there and it's good, and I don't have to justify it. But like, you have to justify your interest in rationality because again, he's acting like he wants balance between the two, but he is opposed to the concept of reason, and that's what he's been saying. You have to justify rationality is why rationality should be considered at all. Whereas I can just default to intuition and be okay with it. Honestly, like, yeah, for real, the things I would want from Matt are to say two things. One, my intuition says you're wrong. How the fuck do you deal with that? Literally, how the fuck do you deal with that? And two, you argued against the concept of rationality. What are you doing in a debate? And if you make any argument, you are rejecting, or not, I shouldn't say rejecting, you are proving the entirety of your anti-rationalist position wrong because you even prefer to argue about logic when confronted with challenge.
Unique to modern Western culture and have only emerged very recently in history, primarily because they maximize GDP.
Holy fuck, I didn't
Why
know
should
he
we
was an
take those standards as
anti-rationalist. I did not
arbiters
know
of
that.
truth
That's
about God
wild.
or anything else?
There's just no bottom with this guy. Like every time you think he can't get worse, every time you think like there's no way he
Now
can
jump into
get
the
lower
open
than this. Like
dialogue.
nope.
So this is for 40 minutes. We'll have open dialogue. If it gets to be too much and that there's too much speaking over each other, then I'll break it into 2 or 1 minute intervals. But let's give it a shot. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours.
So that's an interesting diatribe on the problems of analytic and reasoning. Where was
Okay.
the evidence for God?
Okay, I don't hate this, Matt, but I think there's a much bigger problem here, which is his approach is anti-rational. What he's going to say is that people have an intuitive belief that there's a God. Obviously, that's not evidence for God. But then you're falling into like, then he's going to start screeching about how you're just being overly analytic, and it's cognitive colonialism, and you're being the irrational, somehow being the irrational atheist by engaging in reason.
That was the entire first part was, is there evidence of God? And I didn't hear not only any objectively
So I
verifiable
don't.
empirical
I get
evidence
why
of
he's
God.
doing it, but I
didn't even
don't
hear
know.
any
I think that's not the bigger
intuitive
problem.
evidence
I think
for
that's
God, just a lot about
the least problem.
the value of
This is
intuition and how
smallest
evidently
problem
as
is
an
this debate.
atheist, I'm all about military power, which I generally despise despite having done 8 years in the military, and that's not consistent with my secular humanism, and nothing that I could view as evidence of God.
No, the whole point was to question your standards.
Yeah, the whole
was
point
your
was to
subject
say
of debate.
evidence
Hey, I
is
didn't interrupt
unnecessarily
you.
irrelevant.
You
Correct.
called what I said a diatribe.
Because
Let's
it
try to be
was
civil
what?
I am
I'm
trying
trying
to
to-
be civil. I'm
Then don't
agreeing
interrupt
with
me.
you.
Oh, he's starting real early. So Daniel, more than most people, pretends like civility is a big deal to him. He'll like accuse of his opponents of being uncivil if they, well, do any number of things like a minor interruption here or returning kind to like insults from from Q&A people or whatever. The reason for this, of course, is like he's trying to appear more civil or whatever. But when the truth of the matter is he is massively uncivil in both behavior and opinion. Like you're gonna like you just spent most of your opening calling basically saying atheists are colonizers and the like and dominant have interest in domination through nuclear weapons and are being completely unreasonable because they are overly analytic and that's therefore being like kind of stupid in a way. Like I don't want to say irrational because it's a rationality as an issue with, but basically like they're wrong-headed for thinking rationally. Like that's he's been very uncivil already, but he's cloaked it in argument or like pseudo argument. He does this a lot. He did this with Aaron Ra too, where he'll like accuse the liberal of being all these terrible things. But then if you engage in similar incivility, he'll be like, "Why are you being so uncivil? We're just having an argument. Why are you being rude to me right now?" He does this constantly, and he's doing it earlier than usual with a very minor interruption. This is undoubtedly a tactic of his. He knows, like, there's no way he's doing it this consistently without knowing what he's doing.
Then
Well, I
please
don't know that
interrupt.
interruption is
Don't interrupt
necessarily
me, Peter.
uncivil. Okay.
Yeah, is
So,
already
as
off
I
the
was
rails.
saying, the whole point of this opening is to question your standards of evidence. If
Yeah,
you want
and
to
that's the
say
problem
that,
with your approach,
well,
Matt.
there's no scientific evidence when we do.
Well, he didn't even say. By the way, like this is also Daniel's also wrong here. Matt didn't ask for scientific evidence. He asked for any evidence, even intuitive. And like maybe Matt should like respond with that. Like you haven't even given any intuitive evidence for God. You just said that people believe in it. That's not evidence. You just know that we know that people do believe in God, but it's not any like okay.
Experiments
Yeah,
and
that's not
open
proof of
the
God.
microscope and look at
In
it
any
the
way,
beaker,
in
we
any
don't see
fashion.
God, then I can concede that. So
Okay, so you
what's the point of
conceded
that
that
point if
analytically
the
we cannot
opening was
prove God.
wrong?
Cool.
My opening was
This
to-
should actually be a slam dunk, and I don't have high hopes that Matt will respond the way he needs to demonstrate it. You should like after Daniel has said this, the thing you should focus on, you should immediately be like, okay, so you have admitted that on an analytic approach there is no proof of God. Cool. Now let's go to like the issue of analytic versus intuitive thinking, or like approach it intuitively and be like, well, you didn't demonstrate any intuitive proof of God either. But lock in, like he just admitted there is no rational proof for the existence of God. He just said that. Lock that in and then move on.
take the
I'm not
discussion
confident
to a
Matt will do
higher
that, but I
level
hope he does.
Of what are our standards? What is our epistemology? You're assuming a atheistic epistemology.
No,
that
he's not.
I
So
don't
notice
accept.
how he smuggled that in already. Atheistic epistemology, not analytic. He's conflated the two now. Because remember, he allegedly claimed his alleged position, the thing he said out loud, is that you should have intuition and analytic thinking in balance. He doesn't believe this, of course. I think I've made that. I hope I've made that clear that he absolutely does not believe that they should be in balance. But given that he has said as much, that he's conflating atheistic with analytic thought is pretty telling. Like, notice that, like, I guess not given that he said as much, but given that his position is actually anti-rational, that he's conflating that with atheism is to say, like, yes, there should be, like, yeah, I don't know. It's basically assuming, yeah, if you think about it rationally.
And the most people.
I lost
in
the thread on
history
that
and
thought
even
there.
today
Fill it
don't
in yourself. I believe in you.
That's point number one. As opposed to as for evidence.
Oh, and by the way, the insistence on non-interruption is also to his benefit because of in the avenue of irresponsible platforming. One of the ways to combat platforming a repugnant person like this is to just not let them speak unchallenged, right? Not let them get out long-winded statements about their truly awful beliefs. You can't let them speak uncontested for too long. This is why people often like this will often insist on equal time in a debate, because they also know that it takes longer to prove what you're saying wrong than it takes for you to say it. But the insistence on non-interruption is one way of being like, okay, if you can't ever interrupt, that means I can talk for as long as I want and dominate the conversation with my words without giving you the opportunity to challenge them.
Of
So we'll see how long he talks for this.
We'll talk about it in the next part of the debate, but this is something that's established. There's a natural theology that is established within the cognitive science of religion that people have intuitions about spirit beings, they have intuitions about a purpose to creation, they have intuitions about there
Also,
being
also there's like a kind of an irony here of like you can't determine the truth of that you can't determine that people do have these intuitions without the analytical thinking that you take so much issue with.
an afterlife. These are all things that are
Actually,
established within
we
the
should like given his like breakdown, you could even take the stance of rejecting literally everything he said because well you have to have used analytical scientific thinking to derive the truth about intuition like that, and that there are these two different kinds of thinking. So like intuitively, I think all of what you said was wrong. What do you say about that? Literally how do you argue with that?
cognitive science of
Being
religion.
anti-rationalist like he's been.
Is that a pause for me?
Yes.
Cool. So I wanted to do a debate on Islam versus secular humanism and which one's better for the world, but Daniel didn't want that. And then James kept coming back to me with potential topics for a debate, and I pointed out various
Speaking of the audience here,
problems
it's probably
with them
really
and everything
smart.
else. And then finally I gave up. And just the 3 different topics that he wanted over 3 hours is what I agreed to. And so I'm given a list of topics. And topic 1 is there evidence of God? I rest my case because he just said that the entire purpose of his opening was to question my epistemology. I am irrelevant, and my epistemology is irrelevant to whether or not there is evidence of God. And if you demand that the first hour be on is there evidence for God, and you do not address that topic and admit that instead
I like
you've
some
decided
of
to go with a
this.
different topic, you have defaulted, and I rest my case.
So some good things. Talking to the audience and making it a meta discussion about the concept of debate and what we're here to argue about is really smart, and especially in the context of him not wanting to debate these things and just kind of giving in to their demands, and then for Daniel to be completely disinterested in actually debating this. I think he could have. I think he could have followed through with that a little bit more clearly. Of like, clearly he's not interested in debating that. Saying I rest my case, like I understand that, but I think you have to make it a little bit more clear because the people who listen to Daniel cannot be very intelligent. Um, I don't love the rest my case rhetoric because then like maybe Daniel's gonna just start talking or whatever. But like, yeah, it's okay. I think the only other thing that I would have really liked was making clear we're not talking about any specific kind of evidence. It was just what is the evidence for God. He said he has none whatsoever, not even intuitive. And so yeah, like why are we here? And why are you wasting my time? Like you should, yeah, I don't know. I feel like you can be a lot more aggressive about this and feel like you ought to be, as opposed to just like throwing up your hands and like why? Because this is kind of the problem. This is something we talked about when we watched that Sarah Zed video. Is it like this isn't a situation where if you stop talking, so will they. This is more akin to, you know, a pro wrestler arms outstretched. Why won't anyone fight me? That's Daniel. And for you to just throw up your hands and be like, I'm not doing this, I'm worried that he's going to simply prance around the ring being like, well, clearly my opponent doesn't want to beat me and I win and yada yada, etc. You're going to have to join the fray again. And at that point, it's like, well, then why'd you say you rest your case? I don't know. Like, I'm
No,
nitpicking a
it's the
little
same
bit, but
exact topic. If you have a debate
it's not.
topic, part of the debate is to analyze the topic and the assumptions that go into one position or another. I'm analyzing the assumptions that go into the first sentence or the
Well,
second sentence.
but you, okay, so like that can be true that like the assumptions are kind of relevant here, but it doesn't matter because you presented no evidence for the existence of God. Not no analytic evidence, you presented none. The only thing that comes close to evidence, and it's not, is that people have an intuition that God is real. But at the point where you're saying that these intuitions must therefore mean that it's true, means that my intuition that God isn't real or my intuition that you're wrong must also be true. And you have no way of differentiating between these things.
You had was that this kind of scientific analysis is the best route to truth. I am objecting to that.
And this is also an
proposing-
issue. Like this argument from Daniel also is kind of at issue when like you made a PowerPoint, bro. You made a PowerPoint. What if I didn't say any of those things? You assumed going in that this was going to be relevant to my position, but also like, what if it's not? Okay, fine. Let's argue on the axis of intuition. Intuitively, I think you're wrong, but you have presented no evidence whatsoever. Your PowerPoint is only relevant if we are talking specifically about my analytical approach. and not relevant at all to the subject of God.
An alternative.
We'll see what Matt says about it. This
How
is
about
like, this is a
you
really,
explain to
this
us
is-
and justify why
this is like
it's
he's
the
not even
best route
debating.
to
Yeah.
truth.
Because the subject of the debate is there evidence of God?
Yeah, how do we determine that? You're asserting that it has to be scientific evidence.
Nope.
The subject of the
He
debate
is asking,
is there
is there evidence
God?
at all?
My answer is no, and I talked about what sort of evidence I would accept or not accept.
And you've
I
presented
didn't
no
say
evidence
anything at all
whatsoever.
about shutting down intuition. I didn't say that intuition.
Matt, this is a little bit off the mark here. Just tell him, like, just say it out loud. You presented no evidence of any kind, scientific or otherwise. It's not just that you didn't meet my style of criterion. You said nothing, absolutely nothing, that even alludes to the possibility that we can know God exists.
Should be sidelined or less important, or that it has no. I thought we were done interrupting.
That was good, by the
Or
way.
that it has no importance.
The, like,
I didn't do any of the
If he's
things
gonna be that finicky about interruptions, yeah, shit on him every time he tries.
that he asserted. And not only did he not present any evidence
Okay, there we
of
go.
God for us to address, but he fully acknowledged that that was not the purpose of his opening statement.
Yeah.
I rest my case.
Stop saying you rest your
Where's
case, but
the
otherwise you're
evidence that
correct.
the external world exists.
That's not the subject of the debate either.
I want to know, like, your standards of evidence for God. Do they have any meaning?
It doesn't
outside
matter.
of
It doesn't
that
matter what his
particular
standards are.
question
You
in the
presented no
very
evidence to
specific
any
way
standard.
that you've defined it to set the debate up in your favor? Is there anything else that is scientifically verifiable, like the external world,
Yes.
like the principle of non-contradiction? Please give me the
Sorry.
evidence, the objectively verifiable evidence that the law of non-contradiction is true.
That's not the subject of this debate
Very good.
either.
Yeah,
And
refuse
after being
refuse his attempt to distract and derail the conversation. Like, he does this constantly. Yeah, this is okay, Matt. Great job. With this, you are unparalleled. Most people couldn't avoid taking the bait. I would probably fall for it and take the bait at some point. But yeah, insist. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about whether there is evidence for the existence of God. Until you even try to give evidence to that end, and evidence of any kind, we're not actually debating at all.
accused of setting this up so that it would be easy for me to win after acknowledging he chose these topics that I did not want to address.
Yeah, that's important
and
to
now it turns
focus
out
on.
that he also does not want to address. I don't know what to do. James?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, good. I was about to say, when you said I don't know what to do, you should be like, go talk to the moderator. Go say, hey, moderator, my opponent is disinterested in this topic. Why are we here? Why are you wasting? And especially because Matt was invited here by Modern Day Debates and like invited here with the expectation of putting on this performance or whatever, like in participating in the debate. It costs him time and effort, and I don't know, he might be being paid for it, I have no idea, but he should be like, hey man, you invited me here, why was my time wasted to argue against someone who has no interest in arguing his position? And like, bring it to the moderator, talk past Daniel, because he's not here for an actual debate.
No, there's plenty of evidence.
But the problem was, he just went, James, like, just like pointed at him, but he should talk to the moderator and be like, hey, my opponent doesn't want to debate this. Why did you waste my time and bring me here? Put kind of put some pressure on the moderator, make him respond to that, because that's like a charge, right? Like, you're charging him with having wasted your time, and it's not about whether his opponent, is like correct about his epistemological position, where he's not trying to debate the thing we're here to debate about. He said so out loud.
You ask people
Start
for
presenting.
evidence.
But
if you
in this case, Daniel it's kind of appropriate for Daniel to chime in, whereas if he said like, hey James, what the fuck is up with this? Now James is responding and not Daniel. Now you two are having a conversation.
ask people for evidence of God, they will point to their sense that God exists. They will.
Well, no,
point to their
usually
sense
people
that
have
when they look at the
have
world,
more of
they see it
a
as
thing
being
like that than that,
created by a supreme being for a purpose. When you ask people about any number of things that are not scientific, they will have a tendency to answer in specific ways. These are studied within the cognitive science of religion and psychology generally. if you ask people for evidence of the external
So
world,
the response here
or
is to say
basic
people have different
arithmetic
intuitions.
propositions,
Some people have
there's a
intuitions
tendency.
that there are no gods. Some people have my intuition is that you're completely wrong about this. We obviously cannot believe that all intuitions are correct. And our intuition, again, is towards animism, not theism. But don't just volley, right? Don't turn it back to him. Instead, turn to the moderator and say, "Hey, man, he's still not trying to argue. He's still not here to debate at all. Why is my time being wasted?"
Tendency to answer in consistent ways in a universal fashion. What this
That's not
tells us is
universal
that
whatsoever,
the
by
human
the way.
mind has a certain structure, it works in a certain way.
People will
And we
give
have
you
to
all
understand
sorts of
the
reasons
human
why they believe in
mind
God.
in order to act.
When I believed, there was a brief period where I did. When I believed, I would not have said I had an intuition for it. I might have told you about like the religious experience that I had, which I'm not going to talk about here. But I will not have just said I have some intuition, even though that it was like kind of an intuitive type of thing. Like I believed the reality of the experience I had, but that's not. I have an intuition that God exists. They have reasons for that, and those reasons are absolutely not universal.
Ask questions about morality,
Those might be
religion,
bad reasons, by
aesthetics,
the way. People
logic,
have reasons.
mathematics, all of these science, right? Empirical data.
Now he's just
All of these things
talking. This
have
is just
to be
nothing.
understood with reference to human psychology. So it's not irrelevant to
No,
the
it's
debate.
completely
It's actually a core first step of being able to debate.
No, like,
Evidence for
well, but the thing is, like, step 2 for you to make your position is to then give any sort of evidence for the existence of God, and you haven't done that. To say like there's a psychological aspect of like what is compelling, and then leave it there, you still haven't demonstrated. You haven't made any argument for the existence of God. You just say analytic thinking is useless. You're wrong about that, by the way, but you've responded to a different topic
anything, let alone evidence for
and
God.
not at all to the topic, the
So
stated
what we
topic.
just heard was that if you ask people, they'll tell you that they believe in a God. Some of them may even say they intuit it. I'm still asking and still waiting for a demonstration of evidence for God. That's evidence that people believe in God. And if you just said, "Hey, I want to debate whether or not people believe in God," I'd say, "Why would
Oh,
we
that's
do
pretty
that?
good.
I
I like that.
clearly agree that
Yeah,
people
there's
believe in
evidence that
God."
people. Okay, that's really really smart. I missed that entirely. Yeah, the intuition is that people believe demonstrates that people believe in God. That is evidence of that, but not that God is real. You'd have to believe. You should. I really hope he follows it up with, if we are going to assume that people's intuitions on things aren't always real, then you have to reckon with people's intuitions on things that are contrary to your beliefs. For example, people that intuitively do not believe in gods, or people who intuitively believe that you're wrong or abusive. Well, we're probably right about the abusive thing. Like people who intuitively think that your argument is dog shit. Like how could you ever argue with that? You can't, because you either have to treat all intuitions as equally reasonable. Excuse me. You have to treat all intuitions as equally reasonable, or you have to have a mechanism by which you can sort the reasonable intuitions from the unreasonable ones. The problem is he cannot do the first because it's obviously contradictory, and he can't do the second because that requires the analytic thinking that he has been railing against this whole time.
I used to believe in God, but I didn't do it necessarily because of intuition, although some people might do it for intuitional reasons. Some people might think that they're doing it for good evidence reasons. But when I found out that I didn't have good evidence,
I don't
when I
love,
found out
by
that
the way,
intuitions
that
could be wrong,
that Daniel managed to suck Matt back into the debate by pretending like he's actually debating it. This again, he should be making more appeals to the moderator of just like, hey man, my opponent has presented zero evidence. He has made no effort to present evidence. He has stated outright that he doesn't need evidence, or that and that evidence can't be provided. He instead wants to attack the concept of rationality. Why is my time being wasted?
wrong. And if you're going to have intuitions about, oh, I don't know, whether or
And
not
like
the
make it a
restaurant's
moderator
gonna
problem.
be
Like,
busy,
what
that's probably
did you
based on
invite me
past
here just to
experience
waste
and
my
data
time?
that
Like,
you're just using
or
your
was I
gut
invited
to
here
assess.
just merely
and
to
so
waste
what
my
you're
time? You know.
describing is potentially intuition there isn't actually intuition, but is based on data. But we don't have any data that I'm aware of for God. We don't have any evidence that I'm
You can make a stronger statement than that. Daniel has said there can be no such evidence for the existence of God.
Where for God, you haven't presented any, and that's the subject of the first hours of debate.
Intuitions are evidence. Intuitions are evidence. Just
Okay,
because
so
you
now
don't
he said
accept
that.
them.
So now clap back. My intuition is that everything you've just said is wrong. Now what?
That doesn't mean that they're not evidence. There are different types of intuitions. I didn't say all intuitions are equally compelling. There are
Okay, cool. Now he's doing the work that Matt should have been doing, and this is also kind of telling that he knows what the issues are with his argument. He knows that there's a problem of considering all intuitions equally correct. He knows he can't do that, but Matt hasn't said it. So now he's saying, okay, they can't all be they're not all equally reasonable. Okay, cool. But are any mechanism by which we might sort the reasonable from the unreasonable intuitions would be using analytical thinking, which you've outright rejected. So now what?
some intuitions that are so compelling that no one has questioned them for most of human history, like the intuition that there's an external world, for example.
And again, he's going back to remember, he's insisting on the use of the word compelling because because it's synonymous with persuasive, but not true. He's not even attempting to argue that these things are true, just that they're convincing to people.
Or the intuition regarding the law of non-contradiction, certain moral intuitions, like it is wrong to harm people. People have universally
Yeah, but
had
you
this
don't
intuition.
believe in
Why?
these things,
Because
by the
every
way.
moral system, every religion that we see has this principle in it, implicitly or explicitly, that it is wrong to harm people without reason. That is evidence of its truth insofar as the human mind is capable of accessing the truth.
Okay,
That's the
cool.
point.
So now he's actually trying to make an argument. Now he is saying that the intuition people have of God's existence makes it true. Obviously, that's nonsense. But he's positioned himself in a way where, like, if you try to argue with it, you're doing an analytical thinking, and that's nonsense. But you could push back on, like, okay, but we know that some intuitions are false. How can we determine which ones are true and which ones are false? And if we know that some of them are false, then isn't that enough to reject your position that, well, this is an intuition, therefore it's true?
And the belief in God is also one of these very strong intuitions that human beings have that they develop from childhood. So that is evidence.
Now, they
You don't
develop it from
accept
childhood.
as evidence. That's my
I don't know
point.
if you know this. Children are usually raised by parents. And if most people are religious, they're going to raise their kids religious. It's not an in a vacuum intuition. It's being raised by people.
Boy, have I got some surprises for you. Daniel seems to think that nobody's questioned reality. Evidently you've never heard of solipsism. And the
For most of
various
history
dis-
was
Whoa,
You're
what's with the
interrupting me
interruptions, my
again.
dude? What the hell? Yeah, for real.
What's good for the goose?
Clap back every time. Great, Matt.
Solipsism, and the study of this within philosophy, is something that is robustly argued all over. It's almost argued more than whether or not atheists can be rocks or whether or not tacos are sandwiches. Solipsism is the issue of, can we trust? And do we know that the outside world that we think is the outside world that we experience, is it the real true world? And as far as I'm aware, there is no solution to the problem of hard
It was a
solipsism.
principal component of Descartes' argumentation for the existence of God. By the way.
When you say that people's intuitions about God count as evidence, as I was pointing out, whether you're going to have objectively verifiable facts.
Wrong. Completely wrong, Matt. Just do not use terms like that because he's going to rail against the concept of rationality. What you instead need to, you just don't put it in those terms. You have to say something to the effect of, intuitions are not always true. We need a way to determine which ones are true and which ones aren't. You've rejected the concept of doing that. So how can we ever know that? How can we ever know anything about anything under the framework that you've laid out? Take issue with his framing. Don't walk into it.
Or objectively verifiable empirical evidence or not, at a minimum, the evidence that you demonstrate someone's intuition, if you want to claim that's evidence, you have to make a demonstration to show how that intuition is consistent with a specific God concept and excludes other God concepts, and how we can demonstrate that it is probably correct. And you haven't done any of that. You've just asserted that people have intuitions about God and that we shouldn't dismiss them. I didn't say we
I'm like pretty annoyed at Matt not stating in any way, shape, or form, not taking issue in any way with with Daniel's issues with, as he calls it, analytical thinking. Like, you have to make explicit he's arguing against the concept of reason, and instead what Matt's doing is simply arguing in this as though that hasn't happened, and now Daniel gets to be like, well, you're just doing the colonialism again. Why we shouldn't be thinking that way? We should be thinking intuitively. That's wrong, you know.
we should.
Sorry, you've asserted from the beginning, in your opening statement, that the route,
Yeah,
I
there
think you used the
walks
word route,
right into
to
it.
understanding reality and truth is through this kind of scientific analytic investigation.
What do you want?
You asserted that. You asserted that. So
Yeah,
why
you just
can't
walked
you just
right the fuck
justify
into it.
Why can't you tell us why we should accept that standard?
Because the first hour of this debate is not, is Matt's epistemology sound? It's, is there
Yes,
evidence?
it is. The whole debate.
No,
The
it's
whole
not.
the whole
No, it's
debate
not.
is
No,
about
it's
who's
not.
You should get mad at him about interrupting again. Stare him down again.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yes, it
Keep
is.
it up.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Meanwhile, what I said is that scientific inquiry is the most consistently reliable pathway to demonstrably understanding reality. I didn't say that intuition couldn't get you to the right answer. Intuitions need...
If anything, Matt made exceptions for intuition by pointing out the fallacy. By stating that just because something is logically fallacious doesn't mean it is false, is leaving the door open for intuition. If you intuitively believe something, that is not a good reason to believe it, but you might still be correct. Like if I had the intuition, you know what, I feel like right now in, like, I don't know, Nova Scotia, to just pick a random place, right now it's snowing. Like, or we'll say right now it's sunny, as a slightly more likely thing. Okay, that's my intuition. It's probably sunny there right now. That's a bad reason to think that, but if I happen to be right, well, I'm still right, you know? Like, it could still be the case that it is sunny there right now.
to be demonstrated in their reliability, because the wise...
So I think Nova Scotia is like a province. It's a big-ass place for it to be, like, we'll say instead, like, Montreal, right? Like a specific place.
person, as Hume would
More
do,
specific, anyway.
proportions their confidence to the evidence. You can have intuitions, and they might be right, but the way to be confident and the way for them to count as good evidence is to show that they are probably right.
He's just...
So asserting that people have intuitions doesn't make them evidence. It
This
doesn't
video
make them
quality is not great.
reliable, and it doesn't mean that people's intuitions about whether the God is a Christian God, a Scientologist God, a Hindu God, a Muslim God, or some other God that nobody's proposed as any demonstration that it's likely to be correct.
So I think that, there's another issue here, is like, while I agree that the intuitive belief people have don't line up to a specific God, that is more appropriate for the following debate than this one, because while it is true that Daniel believes in a specific God and not just the concept that gods could exist, this is more like, is there good reason to believe that there is such a thing as a God? And then the follow-up is which specific one. The people's intuition, if we're going to hold that they have any weight at all, the fact that there's different people have different intuitions has no bearing as to whether they have an intuition about the existence of a God. It's not really relevant to this conversation.
And this hour of the debate is supposed to be about evidence of God. I still am waiting.
This is also part where, like, you should also, like, you could also appeal to the moderator. I've seen Destiny do this before, and this was really smart. Just be like, hey, moderator, what is the topic of this debate in clear terms? Like, what was the topic we were told in advance, word for word? Because if the topic is like, is there compelling reason to believe in God? Matt should have pushed back earlier. I guess maybe that's a good reason not to ask, is if that was what the wording was. If the wording was, is there evidence for the existence of God? Then open and shut, man. It does not matter what the epistemological approach that I have is. You can take issue with it in, like, your rebuttal or whatever, but you have presented no evidence of any. The only evidence of any kind you've presented is that people have intuitions, therefore, of the thing, therefore it is true, and it is trivially easy to debunk that. Part of the problem, of course, is that Matt also hasn't done that. He hasn't debunked it in a way that is not clearly, like, the atheist analytical approach.
So your standard of evidence takes out all moral claims,
No.
moral truths, I'll say, actually.
Well, there are no moral
because
truths,
I do
but
believe
yeah.
it is a moral truth that harming others for no reason is wrong.
So now,
I
like,
ca-
he's
I can't-
backing up to, like, an uncontroversial statement that is intuitive, and so this way he could say, like, well, this is intuitive, and everyone agrees with me. Therefore, intuitions are true. Therefore, this intuition is true. But he's also already accepted that he's already admitted that not all intuitive beliefs are true. So you'd have to demonstrate the truth of this intuitive belief. It doesn't matter how uncontroversial some intuitive beliefs are. If there's a possibility for them to be incorrect, you have to demonstrate why this one is not.
can't demonstrate that. I can't bring you peer-reviewed studies to establish that. I do believe
Right, because
that
it's not scientific. But he's also conflating again the concept of reason with the concept with science. We're not talking about science. We're talking about evidence. Evidence of basically of any kind. And intuition is not evidence.
law of non-contradiction is true. I can't bring you scientific evidence for that. I
mean,
can't
yeah,
I
you
can't
actually can demonstrate the
that
truth
in
of
a
the
proof.
law of
I
non-contradiction.
do believe that the external world exists. I cannot demonstrate that through a proof. I
And
can't bring
again,
you
like, notice like he's talking about like what are considered properly basic beliefs that you could not possibly prove, but are like foundational to how you view the world. But a belief in God is not one such belief. And even if it was, then your argument should be it's properly basic. I couldn't ever prove it, but I believe it's true. In which case, you are admitting again that you have no evidence for the belief for the proof of God in the existence of God. You simply believe it's true and think that that's good enough.
scientific evidence for
In which
that.
case, why are we here? Why are we
All
doing a
of those
debate?
things and much more.
He is
Basic
completely
mathematical
unwilling to
truths, basic
debate.
aesthetic truths, like eating human flesh is
That's not an
disgusting.
aesthetic truth.
That is a truth.
That's not an
And I'll
aesthetic
stand
truth.
by that. But there's no scientific result
That's a
that
moral
will
truth,
say
by the way.
that is true. But it is true. That is reality. We all have.
And again, so like he's just saying the beginning of his opening again. Matt really needs to push back on like not all intuitions are true. You've admitted that. Therefore, we must ask, how do we know that the intuition that God is real must be true? And can you do that without like engaging in analytical thought?
These universal
Yeah, it's been a
truths
yeah.
that
There are a couple
we abide by
of
in
really big
understanding
problems with Matt's
reality,
approach
but
here.
none of that has to do with scientific evidence. None of that has to do with.
And again,
having
he's
this
conflating analytic approaches to scientific evidence. He's rejected the concept of like rationality and reason, not merely science, though he's opposed to science as well, and that's pretty telling. But like even make an argument. He hasn't made an argument. He's merely said there are intuitions. One of them is that God is real. It's true because because that intuition exists.
kind of deductive proof, yet it's still true. Yet it's still a reality. What the atheist does,
Now here's the ad
and in
hominem.
general, not just Matt, the atheist says that none of that is really real, and
Matt's
we don't need to talk
walking
about that. Let's
into
just
that. He
talk
hasn't
about what is
opposed to the-
scientific. But this is
Well, he's not talking about what's scientific. He's talking about what's evidence of any kind. Never saw this debate. Thanks for coming here. Yeah, it's pretty new, Camgal. This was streamed 2 days ago.
drastic, violent limitation on reality that the
I'm glad you're enjoying
vast majority of humanity, not only today but throughout history, doesn't share.
This is an argument ad populum, but of course he's rejected the concept of reason. So making the argument that he's engaging in fallacious argumentation is something he can reject outright.
People don't have this scientific reductionist view of reality.
Notice he's calling scientific. He's always saying scientific with reductionist. Well, I guess not always, but like, in what way is scientific reductionist? In the way he's presented it, it's just that it takes away the non-scientific evidences of the world, but he's not presenting evidence. He's just merely saying, well, lots of people believe it, therefore it's true, which is obviously fallacious. And that's not on a scientific basis. That's on a logical basis.
Opening statement, not the Mitch McConnell joke, which was really good, by the way. But if you go back
It was.
To the
I got.
beginning where was
It got a
describing
chuckle out of
things,
me.
In addition to talking about the nature of evidence and everything else, I think I specifically pointed out that there are things where we're not going to be able to point to empirical evidence, and I think I used morality as an example for that.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't listening, and
that
Okay, so two things, Matt. One, he wasn't listening. He's obviously not going to listen. He's the worst faith actor I've ever seen. Two, he's rejected the concept of reason. It doesn't matter that you've given rational arguments for some of the things he's talking about. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Why are you not talking about it at all?
I am tossing those things out is not remotely accurate, and I guess he just missed part of my opening.
No, he
My
wasn't listening
opening was
to any
about
of it
evidence
at
of
all
God,
whatsoever.
not about competing epistemologies, so I'm still waiting.
Well, the
Boo, Matt, come on, man. Address the one thing he has said. You're leaving the only things of importance on the table. He has said two things that matter. One, that there is an intuition that God is real, therefore God is real. That is one argument he has made. The only argument whatsoever he's made towards the existence of God and not touching it is it's pretty bad. Like, that's the only thing you have to chew on, and you're not doing it. It makes it seem like you don't have a retort for this, and it's trivially easy to deal with. And then two, that the concept of rationality is bad. That engaging in it is somehow like colonialist and rejects the concept of like most of life or whatever. Like, that we can't like know things through analytical, like, or that the analytical approach is always bad. And while he has claimed, like, he has the stupid slide on screen, like, you have to find the middle ground, but like, obviously he doesn't believe that shit. He's been very clear about how his issues with analytical thought. Like, and you're just not talking about either of these things, and you're not only that, you're also talking way too little. He goes off on these long diatribes. It makes him sound like he's knows what he's talking about, and you're just like, well, I'm still waiting. Like, dude, you gotta say something here.
difference is when it comes to morality, I'll stand up and say, this is true. And it's not something that I can doubt. If I doubt it, I doubt my reality.
Yeah, now he's opposed to the concept of doubt whatsoever. Like, okay, really? You're just gonna let that? Like, we'll see if Matt just lets that slide. But like, I think he will, given how he's approached everything else. He's like, the like overarching. This is what we would call like an overview in debate. This would be the idea of like, this is something that kind of hangs over the entire discussion and frames how we look at it, both the anti-rationality and now the being opposed to the concept of doubt, have to be addressed before we can address anything else. And it's completely reasonable to address it by saying, listen, man, we're here for a debate, and he's opposed to the concept of logical argumentation. Why are we here? That's completely reasonable, but you have to say something about it. And you've stopped taking issue with his approach, and like only really like you're only looking at the details of the arguments and not the broader statements being made, and it's hurting you so much, Matt.
But your position, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that morality is something that we can't have objectively verifiable facts about. Our positions are not the same on morality. My position is shared by the vast majority of human beings.
It's not,
no one
by
even
the way.
questions that. That's people's
No,
reality.
that's not true. That's not true whatsoever. But he wants to pretend like it is to make it seem like Matt is being the unreasonable one here. No, it's not true whatsoever. Most people do not agree with Daniel's positions on morality. I mean, he thinks that like women should be subservient, and it's okay for one man to like own several women as wives, but like women can't, like, shouldn't be able to like have multiple husbands or be able to go out like and have to cover themselves up all the time, and like people should have to like follow their specific duty as laid out by him and his hyper extremist reading of the Quran. Like, no, that is not agreed to by most people.
I
He's
doubt
literally
reality.
just lying.
I doubt many things that I intuitively feel about reality. And yes, our view on morality is very different, with something I'm sure we'll get to in a little while, which everybody is already aware of. When it comes to moral truths, or
You're
let's
just
say
gonna
the
leave it
law of
all?
non-contradiction, identity non-contradiction and excluded
You're
middle.
too yeah, Matt. This is where like too much of your debate experience or debate understanding has come from experience and not from, or come from experience of debates like this and not from like like, I don't know, learning how debates happen. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, he's too focused on the subpoints of these arguments and not enough on like the broader thing being discussed. He's lost in the weeds, and it's rough because there are so few weeds. He's lost in the two weeds that exist. It's not like there's a field of them. There's like two things to talk about, and I don't know, he's just kind of not talking about what he needs to. He did well earlier.
We can't demonstrate that they're true because you'd have to assume that they're true to try to prove they're false, which means they're not falsifiable. However, what we can do is demonstrate.
Wait, hold on. I think he said something really good there. I just want to make sure that I understood that correctly. But of course, YouTube takes issue with backing up 10 seconds. I don't know why it does this. Probably an issue with streaming, right? Too much.
Logical thinking or presuppositions. We can't demonstrate that they're true because you'd have to assume that they're true to try to prove they're false, which means they're not falsifiable. However, what we can do is demonstrate that they consistently seem to be inviolate. That means there doesn't seem to be anything that breaks those rules. But we don't have an exhaustive understanding of the universe.
Oh, never mind. He did not say what I thought he did.
Beginning as a practical, necessary assumption to say, I would like to reason, these are the foundations of reason that I'm going to begin with.
But Matt, he doesn't want to reason. He's opposed to reasoning.
Consistently demonstrate to be true and reliable and have never been shown to not be. It is a reasonable intuition or inference.
And Matt, you just got suckered into having the argument about your epistemological approach again. Like, this is the problem. You got suckered into arguing exactly what he wanted you to argue. That there's a benefit to approaching things in a scientific way, even though you don't realize that that's what's happening, I don't think. But, like, you're right to reject the debate in its entirety if he is unwilling to present evidence. Then you fell off of that, partially baited by the fact that he pretended to have one argument, but you also didn't really address that argument, and now you're just getting lost in... You just got suckered into arguing this again.
Or presupposition that we should continue to use them until such time as somebody demonstrates, hey, we found a problem.
Well, he thinks he has. He thinks he's found a problem because it doesn't align with his extremist views.
But until then,
there are nuclear weapons, therefore the scientific method is wrong, is something he said already.
I rolled it over and over again, and I calculated the probabilities, and this dice consistently conforms to the reliabilities. But it might be the case that angels are picking the number that shows up on the dice every single time, and they're just doing it consistent with the probabilities that I understand. And any day now, that angel could just turn it to something else. So I better not... I don't have any foundation for probability. Bullshit. We have loads of foundation for probabilities.
I guess if he's going to engage, this is a good way of engaging.
What we don't have a way to demonstrate is that it's impossible for it to be otherwise.
Yeah, so how would you falsify the principle of non-contradiction?
I just asserted, just literally
this is the problem with getting suckered into here.
And how is it false? So it's not up to be falsifiable.
Correct.
So why do you say it seems to work, as if there's going to be a future point where it's not going to work? And
well, if we encountered a situation in which contradictory statements were both true, we would be able to reject the law of non-contradiction. Obviously, you fucking moron.
Or will be falsified.
Am I speaking English? I said these things are unfalsifiable. They are presuppositions that continually demonstrate that they are true. There's no reason to think that they could be violated in the future, but you can't demonstrate that. And so it is a presupposition. I am as convinced as I can be of anything that the foundations of logic are reasonable, but you can't prove it. This is the foundational problem of logic.
Then why do you accept it?
And now he's getting so lost in it that he's not clapping back about the interruptions. He should, because he hasn't interrupted since the literal first thing that Daniel said. But Daniel has felt okay with interrupting multiple times. And if he was going to make that much of a stink about it, you should make a stink about it every time he does, especially since you've stopped.
Gosh. If I pick up a pen and I try and write with it, and it writes every time I pick it up and write with it, then I'm going to view that pen as reliable right up until it stops being reliable. That's the same thing for identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. Those things have continued to demonstrate that they seem to be, and
it's not an empirical thing. It's not an empirical thing. How can you demonstrate something?
You're just letting him interrupt.
I didn't say.
How can you demonstrate that harming someone is wrong?
Yeah, he got suckered in. Look at the shit-eating grin on Daniel's face, because he knows he's successfully derailed the conversation.
Like, is there going to be a future point where we discover, oh, actually, harming people for no reason is not wrong. It's actually good. It's not an empirical thing. Like, you're making a category mistake. Like, these are non-empirical things, but you're applying this empirical standard of falsifiability to everything. This is just a basic category mistake.
So everybody pay attention to what's happening.
Okay, talk past him. Very
This
good.
grandstanding is
Grandstanding.
ludicrous. Are you speaking?
Are you gonna
Sorry.
keep interrupting?
Rewind it. I literally
You
have
don't
to
need
say
a
the same
grandstand.
thing
Just
twice.
answer the question. Your principle of
He's
falsifiability-
trying to drag Matt
You don't get to
back
decide
into
what
the
question
weeds.
I
Answer the
answer and what question I don't.
Yeah,
Push
answer.
back on the
And what's
interruptions,
actually
Matt.
happening
Doing it right
here-
now.
You can, but you're an ass. What's
Oh.
happening right? Yeah.
I don't disagree with you, Matt. The problem is he's appeared reasonable to, like, calling him an ass does feel like you're the one being uncivil, even though I get that you're not.
Yes, you are.
Oh, you're hurting my feelings.
I know.
You're breaking my heart.
Leave
Wait
it
till we get
alone.
to the
Just get
other
to your
problems.
argument.
So
Get to the thing you're trying to
so
say.
what's happening here is I explained it, and then I explained it again. And when he didn't have an answer, he instead tried to shift the topic to, is harming people wrong? Are we going to find out that someday harming people's not wrong? And then he shifted that
Point.
topic.
Okay, if Matt, you got another shot here. If you conclude this with note how his only interest is derailing the debate from anything other than evidence for the existence of God, then you can, like, suddenly, like, I don't want to say all will be forgiven, but oh my God, you will have salvaged so much of this debate.
Topic to, is harming people for no reason wrong? When that's not the subject of this debate, it is not the subject of this hour debate, and it is not what we were talking about. Are you going to be able to stay on topic? And
No,
eventually-
no, no, don't ask him. You were talking to the audience. Keep talking to the audience. Point out what he's doing.
present some evidence of God, or are you going to keep grandstanding and deflecting and pulling up topics that we weren't talking about?
Okay, fine. I don't like that he framed this as a question to Daniel, but yes, he finally did what he needed to do. Point out, I don't like that he was using grandstanding because, like, let's be real, Matt, you've been the one grandstanding, but I think it's been justified. So grandstanding wasn't the right word, but pointing out that he was deflecting constantly, shifting from what we were supposed to be debating about constantly, and then and making that clear and explicit, and then putting it back to him like, you have not presented any evidence for the existence of God. That's not entirely true. He did present a bad argument, but the problem is, of course, you also haven't refuted that argument. So he's going to go back to it probably. We'll see. This is
So,
a
if you
different
apply
kind of
the
shit show.
Standard of falsifiability, that's exactly what's in question. That's what the whole
Yeah, look, the standard of falsifiability. Like, I've never seen someone so blatantly opposed to the concept of rationality. He's opposed to the concept of, like, well, we need to be able to prove it false for us to have any way of knowing it's true. It's like, no. A thing can be true even if you can't prove, even if it's impossible for it to be proven wrong. Like, no, we can still know it's true. The unfalsifiability isn't a problem.
opening was about
So
questioning
openly
that
anti-rational.
standard of scientific evidence is the arbiter of truth.
Completely
You
off
haven't
topic.
addressed that at all.
Completely
You
off
just
topic.
grandstand-
This is why you have to put it to the audience, because now his response to your question about deflection is to deflect.
to the audience, and then you keep saying that, well, we don't have evidence for God. Yes, I know, that's the question. That is the debate topic, but we're trying to analyze, what does
No,
evidence actually mean?
We're not.
What are standards of evidence?
But you didn't
that are
ask what
required?
evidence means. You didn't ask what evidence means at all. You said only that things can be compelling to people that are non-rational. But you didn't make any argument about what could be evidence. You merely rejected the concept of rationality. But I really hope that Matt's retort is to focus on the deflection again.
I say that intuitions that human beings have universally from childhood are evidence for God, insofar as we can understand truth, insofar as we can understand reality. That is evidence. You don't accept that as evidence. And you say that, well, this...
And that's the problem. Like, it's not... He hasn't given a reason why it should be unacceptable as evidence, and it is unacceptable as evidence. Daniel would admit that if you held him to it, because he's already said not all intuitions are true, because he has to reckon with the fact that some people intuitively do not believe in God. So you have to... Like, this is the problem with the approach. Like, he's not... Matt has moderated his approach in accordance with the specific arguments, but not with the context of the surroundings he's in. Like, what would be a good analogy here? Like, kind of like if you're, I don't know, like in the context of like a martial arts fight or whatever, you're fighting like, with the specifics of what your opponent's like specific punches are coming from, not paying attention to your surroundings, that you're like that you actually have like there's a hole behind you, and what they're doing is maneuvering you to the hole, not trying to hit you. That's what's happening.
This is not objectively verifiable. And I ask you, why is it not objectively verifiable? You say, well, this is not something that's empirical or scientific. Why would we ever accept this? And then I say, well, what about all these other things that you accept, that you seemingly accept?
Notice the like long
but
diatribe.
they don't have that
off
standard
topic.
of proof, yet you accept them. Do you accept that there's an external world? Do you accept that harming someone for no reason is wrong? Do you accept that, even though you don't have any empirical?
And of course, because we haven't addressed the issues he has with rationality, remember at the beginning he took issue with the concept of doubt and like how it's like completely nonsense to do this. If you you could doubt these things that he's saying, but then he would paint you as being just intuitively completely irrational, even though he's taking the irrationalist position, the openly anti-rationalist position.
Proof. So why won't you accept that God exists?
So I was just accused of saying, why would we accept it if it's not empirical? When I just finished explaining that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are not only not falsifiable, but are an example of the thing I highlighted at the beginning of my opening about things that are not
Taking the bait
based
a
on
little bit here.
empirical evidence. I didn't address the question at all about whether or not I think there's an objective world that we're experiencing. So Daniel is arguing against a fictional straw man of me and still presenting no evidence of God.
It's close. Point out the deflection. You should have pointed out the deflection, but otherwise, what you were talking about was fine.
Accept law of non-contradiction.
Yes.
Why? Where's the
You're getting
where's the
baited
empirical
again.
evidence?
Don't let
That's-
him deflect.
Where's the empirical evidence? As I've explained now 4 times.
It's something that's not empirical. That's my point.
Take
Correct.
issue with the interruptions, dude.
Correct.
So then there can't be any empirical evidence for it, yet you accept it.
I didn't say there couldn't be any empirical evidence for it, but that's not why I
How could-
accept
what-
it.
what could
That's
be-
not,
what
are you going to
could
let me
be
answer, or are
empirical?
you going to talk over me again? I explained why I accepted it, because it continually demonstrates its reliability. And I also pointed out that I accepted initially as a presupposition, because there is no way to demonstrate identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are always true, but there is a way to show that they are true in every example that we can come up with. You can do this with a simple Venn diagram to show that A, not A, and everything is either A or not A, and nothing is both A and not A. This is what a single Venn diagram with a single circle demonstrates. Come up with an example that suggests or shows that identity, non-contradiction, or excluded middle aren't true. Come up with an example where they're not true, and I'll stop believing them, I'll stop believing that they are going to continue to be reliable, because now you'll have demonstrated that there's a circumstance where they're not reliable. But much like the pen, until there's a demonstration that this is going to
Yeah,
not
he's
be
getting
reliable
baited
at
a
some
little
point,
bit
which
here. Like, we're talking about epistemology.
for pens we know. But until that time, I'm justified.
Yeah, Daniel has been
continuing to
very
use
effective at
logic
baiting Matt
as
into
a
talking about other
presupposition
things.
that continues to demonstrate its viability and its reliability. I said nothing at all about why should we believe something if it's not empirical. I did not say at any point that science is the only way to knowledge and understanding. What I said is the most consistently reliable, demonstrable pathway to an accurate model of reality. If you're not going to address what I actually said, could you finally present some evidence of God?
So that's mostly okay. I do like that question at the end. I think one thing he needed to add between the last sentence and this question was just to point out, like, you have not presented evidence of any kind. It's not just that you haven't presented scientific evidence. The only thing you've ever said about it is that some people intuitively believe it's real, that God's real, therefore it's true, and that's obviously on its face nonsense. You could even argue from the position of intuition. Intuitively, that makes no sense. Then what is he going to do? Argue that intuition is wrong? Or is he going to argue that you can discern that that intuitions can be wrong and there are mechanisms by which we can do that, in which case we can call into question the intuition he's relying on?
You're contradicting yourself. You keep saying that, well, this is non-empirical, the law of non-contradiction is non-empirical, but you're still waiting for a demonstration that can happen later in time, meaning an empirical event. This is a contradiction in what you're saying. We can get more
Appeal to the moderator. At this point, just like, dude, he's literally responding to things I'm not saying, and literally not once has characterized what I've said as the thing I've said. He's also actively making efforts to talk about anything other than the topic at hand. He's not here to debate this. I don't know why we're wasting time.
Specific with
which we should have done 20
issue
minutes
of
ago.
Harm. Is harming someone for no reason wrong? That is something. Are you waiting for a future event? Can you explain, like, something that could happen, or
I don't know of an instance of it, but like his insistence that it, like, that if we found an instance where that was the case, where it would disprove this belief of ours that we should still believe it, is kind of telling also. Like, if there was some example that could come up that would disprove this rule, you think you would still believe it anyway?
it could be demonstrated that harming someone for no reason is morally right?
So again,
Don't take the bait, Matt,
law of
please.
non-contradiction. When I say that there's not empirical proof, I'm saying there's no empirical proof that those things will always be true.
Still getting
There's no
baited
way to
into
demonstrate
just
that.
not the God
There's
argument.
no way to demonstrate currently a circumstance under which those would be false. But I don't have complete knowledge of the universe and wouldn't pretend to.
And by the way, I want to point out the purpose of why Daniel is doing what he's doing. What he wants to do is he wants to make sure that people that agree with him cannot possibly be swayed. So how does he do that? He says, okay, you have an intuition that God is real, or you at the very least believe it somewhat intuitively. You are right because it is intuitive. Any arguments are wrong on their face because they engage in reason. And so you are correct to believe the thing you believe. So anyone who has a belief in God, who's listening to him and accepts the things he's saying, could not possibly leave. No matter what Matt said, literally Matt could say anything whatsoever, and it doesn't matter, because they can walk away going, well, that was all logic and arguments, but I believe intuitively, and that's better. So I'm correct. And you might sway someone who doesn't believe by saying, well, it is true that, most people have believed this intuitively. Maybe there is something to that. Even though his arguments are complete dog shit. That's why this is happening, and why it's so bad that Matt keeps getting baited. Because by getting baited into arguing about epistemology, you're not addressing the thing that he actually cares about, which is completely divorced from this conversation whatsoever.
And so my reliance on them is contingent on the fact that they continue to demonstrate that they work. And as soon as they
and now,
stop,
what would this have to do? Given what I was saying, given what I was talking about of how this comes off to an audience, is there literally anything Matt could possibly talk about on this subject that would impact you at all? No, right? Literally nothing could, right?
Be diminished. That's how confidence works. Right now, identity non-contradiction.
And his whole goal is just to waste time.
In all circumstances and in all conceivable circumstances.
And talk about anything
I'm not
else.
Sitting around waiting for somebody to demonstrate that they're not going to work sometime. I don't have any good reason to think that's likely to ever happen. I can't even imagine the circumstance. And so far, nobody else has been able to imagine circumstances under which that's the case. I'm not saying I believe them, but that as they are presuppositions. But that doesn't mean that there aren't empirical facts that are consistent with them. See,
then how are they non?
We're just wasting time. We're just wasting time.
There is not, as I just explained a minute ago, there's not an empirical way to demonstrate that they could be false. But there are empirical ways to demonstrate that they are currently reliable. Every piece of data we ever evaluate is a constant demonstration of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. everything, the fact that I'm me and you're you and I'm not you and you're not me, all of those pieces of empirical information are evaluated within the realm of logic.
Yeah,
And they continue to
I'm really sad
demonstrate
that Matt got
that
baited
the
into this
logic
conversation because this is exactly what Daniel wanted to talk about. Like as we get into these like these diatribes, I kind of, or I shouldn't say diatribes, into these arguments, there's that part of me that's like, is this a good argument? And as I ask that, I'm just like, why are we talking about it? Why are we talking about it at all? Like we should be talking about whether there's evidence for the existence of God. Why are we doing anything other than that?
foundations of logic lead us to accurate models of reality. That's all that they have to be. There's nothing about that that says they're not related to the empirical world. Of course they are. Categorization, this is what set theory is. A isn't just a letter.
Yeah,
It
this is
represents a
just
set
the
of
longer you
things.
talk, the
It
more
could
his
be the
time is
set of
getting wasted.
empirical things. It could be the set of empirical things that
Talking
are
about
blue,
literally
green,
anything but
and
the
come out on
topic.
Thursday. I don't know what that is, but somebody in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon's got something like that. The empirical facts
Wait, what?
demonstrate.
Wait, what were you saying about
It could be
Yu-Gi-Oh!
a set of
Pokemon?
empirical things that are blue, green, and come out on Thursday. I don't know what that is, but somebody in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon's got something like that. The empirical
I don't know what you're
facts
talking about.
demonstrate the reliability of that, but it also can be shown as an abstraction, which is why I pointed out a Venn diagram.
Well, can you answer the
And it's
moral,
still not evidence of God.
the moral claim?
Yeah, like I like that he's ending on like, hey, we're not talking about the thing, but make it more. It's not pointed enough because now Daniel can just be like, oh, what about this thing? What about that? He's just not going to talk about it. You spent all this time talking about the thing he wants you to talk about, and almost no time talking about what we ought to be talking about and what he's trying to avoid.
The moral claim is irrelevant to this hour of the debate. I'm still waiting for
How is
evidence
that
of God.
irrelevant? You just bloviated about the law of non-contradiction. Explain
Bloviated.
to us
Yeah,
this
okay.
moral principle of harming others for no reason is wrong. Presumably, you accept that. Give me the empirical evidence or the objectively verifiable fact that that's the case. Like when you talk about everything in nature demonstrates the law of non-contradiction, that sounds like a lot of theists. Everything in nature demonstrates that God exists. You have a certain
That's also not true whatsoever, and he's never even attempted to make an argument like that until this moment. Like that would maybe you could maybe make an argument that that's evidence for God, but he hasn't. He just mentioned that the argument exists. He didn't try to demonstrate it whatsoever.
intuition, a logical intuition about the law of non-contradiction. And that's why you use terms like, oh, it works. You know, I have confidence in it. My confidence is not diminished. You're expressing an intuition, which is, as I defined, a tendency to find something compelling. That's all you're expressing. You're just trying to fit it into this mold of empiricism. But you contradict
Yep, here's
yourself.
the
At first you say that it's
anti-rationalism.
non-falsifiable, it's non-empirical, and then you still have this standard of falsifiability for non-contradiction. But please answer this question. Will we ever determine in the future that
Yeah,
harming
so like
others for...
the please answer this question is because it's like no. Please let me deflect from the actual subject and like making it seem like he's holding Matt to this question is like trying to compel him to stay off topic.
for no reason, it can be correct.
That Matt said anything
this
other
is a
than hey, we're not we should be talking about this subject has been like a win for Daniel. It's
What
really
happens when you
sad.
don't listen, and when you have a flawed epistemology, because I was just told that because I bloviated about the laws of non-contradiction, identity, and excluded middle, that this required me to answer, or perhaps bloviate, about his other irrelevant question that is also not about the evidence of God, and you sure are wrong. I don't have that requirement in this particular debate.
Yeah, you can dodge it. Dodge it. No
Yeah,
problem.
so you're framing it
So
as dodging the
externally-
question, and that works because Matt has not spent every moment talking about how we're off topic. If Matt had never answered any of these these irrelevant questions, if Matt had just been like, "Hey man, why aren't we talking about the existence of God? Hey, shouldn't you have been giving me evidence about that? Why are you asking me questions about my epistemology? Why instead of giving evidence for the existence of God? You haven't done that at all. Hey, moderator, why are we wasting time here? Why was I invited to debate this guy who does not want to debate the topic? Are you going to say something to him about actually making his argument? What the fuck, man? If he had done that the whole time, Daniel couldn't get away with being like, "Oh, you're just dodging the question here," because he wouldn't be dodging. He would have demonstrated that he would have made clear his issue with deflections, which have been going on nonstop since the outset, and gotten the moderator involved in in alignment with like, no, you're not debating what we're supposed to be debating. That's the problem. You're the issue, not me for not wanting to answer your irrelevant question.
At least
world.
when I dodge it, I'm
External.
not constantly dodging the subject of the actual
the
debate.
subject
Talk
is
to the
evidence.
moderator,
The subject
dude.
is
The subject
evidence
is
and
evidence for
epistemology.
God,
It's literally
not-
in the title.
The subject is
Evidence for
of
God. What is our
It
standard
not-
of evidence?
It is not.
If you don't
Matt,
understand the
justify
debate, if
whether
you
or
don't
not it's okay
understand the
to harm
debate, you
people.
don't understand that.
I
That's
don't
not my
understand the
problem.
debate. Literally,
This is why you needed
Evidence-
to apply to the appeal to the moderator. And honestly, James, you're fucking up, man. Like, I get that you just want to put on a show, but for real, when we're this off topic this whole time, Matt has said this repeatedly. He's asked you about it, not as pointedly as he needed to, admittedly, but like when we're on this, we're this far in and we're not talking about it whatsoever, and you haven't stepped in at all. You're fucking up, man. Normally I'm okay. Normally I think James' moderation is fine, but when it comes to Daniel, he fucks up constantly, and this is pretty bad. And now because of this, Daniel gets to posture like Matt doesn't understand what's going on when Daniel is the one who is so thoroughly off topic.
You know core of the debate.
Whatever.
No,
Evidence
don't
and
just throw up your hands.
epistemology
He's
is the
just
core
gonna
of
go
the
on
debate.
if you
rest
don't.
my case. I
Yeah,
rested
you
an
rested a
hour
long
ago.
time ago. You
Go
rested
ahead,
a long
keep,
time ago.
Keep telling me I don't understand the debate.
Dude,
that you picked
yeah,
up
I don't know.
lately.
That's what
Matt's
you keep
approach was
telling
kind of
me
a
that I
problem
don't
here, but
understand.
James, for real, fucked up hard.
Yeah, so
Good luck.
this is the whole debate is about evidence and epistemology. I gave
Nope.
evidence, you just don't accept
It's about
it. So
any
the
evidence
question
whatsoever.
becomes,
You
why
did not
don't
give
you
evidence,
accept
in
it?
fact.
And you're not able to justify why you accept certain things on the basis of not having any
Yeah,
kind
this
of
is an
science.
actual problem. So Daniel is actually correct here. He did not. Matt has not talked about why like you can reject some things and not others that are intuitive beliefs, but Daniel recognizes that he has to do the same thing. He has to engage in the process of determining which intuitive beliefs are real and which are true and which ones aren't. But he hasn't made any effort towards that. This is the problem. Again, Matt responding too much to the specifics and not to the overarching things. He needed to do two things in this debate. He did one of them weakly, and he didn't do the other one at all.
Scientific
Or
evidence
barely
behind that. You
engaged
said you
with doing the
accept
other.
certain laws of logic. You accept certain moral principles. You accept that the external world exists. You accept those things without any kind of empirical evidence. So that
At this point, like, I don't like that Daniel is being allowed to talk this long. Like, Matt should be pushing back and probably interrupting, given how much Daniel has been interrupting. But given that he's letting him go, he should let him go on, do his tirade, and then be like, "Hey, James, do you notice how he still hasn't made any arguments for the existence of God? How long am I going to be made to sit here?"
that you're either
And if he's and make a threat, right? Like, and say, "Hey, James, if he's not going to debate the topic at hand, why should I take part in the other two parts of this? Why did I come out here today?" Because this is also this. It's not just his time. This is in person. Matt had to go somewhere, possibly in a different city or state, in order to be here. Make it direct. Maybe like, "Hey, man, you asked me to be here, and you asked me to be here to debate a topic, and my opponent has repeatedly refused to engage with that topic, and you want me to sit through two more of these? I don't want to do that. I only want to argue the things that I only want to debate the things that are intended to be debate, and not these irrelevant subjects that are deflections."
inconsistent with your standard of evidence.
Get James
I
in
mean,
on
that's
this.
what it
Like,
shows. You're inconsistent with your standard of evidence. Explain how you are consistent when there are things that you do accept without any empirical.
and by the way,
evidence.
like this standard that Daniel's putting, he's levying an impossible standard. Show how you're consistent in your standards of evidence. Daniel, you know you're inconsistent with your standards of evidence because you've engaged in reason while arguing against the concept of reason. You've engaged in, you've said outright that intuition is evidence of truth while also admitting that not all intuitions are correct. This is a thing that happens a lot from bad faith actors, is they will impose an impossible standard that they also couldn't possibly meet, but you're not imposing it on them. We saw this with Sanvi reasoning and definitions of what it is, what a woman is. She refused absolutely to hold herself to a definition that met the same rigorous standards that she was demanding from her opponent. This happens all the time. And you have to push back
But
on it.
you're accusing me of.
Or in this case, you
claiming
need to
God
ignore the
exists without
deflection
empirical
and
evidence.
appeal to
What
the
I'm
moderator.
saying that's not relevant to establishing that God exists and that God is a part of reality.
So now I've been accused of another thing that's not true, which is not explaining why I didn't accept his claim about intuitive
I think you're getting lost in the
evidence for
weeds
God.
again, man.
And I think I specifically said that it had to do with whether or not that evidence is consistent with facts and whether or not it excludes other potential hypotheses. This is how we tell whether or not something is evidence for a proposition, because right now, if somebody has an intuitive notion about a God, well, that's evidence that maybe that could be evidence that there's a God. It could be evidence that they're delusional. And
Yep.
so until you come up with
Okay, here's a little bit of pushing back.
the methodology,
But the problem is he's pushing back in a way that only works if you are not opposed to the concept of reason, which Daniel is. And again, you haven't called him out on that.
distinguish between
He's just going to be able to be like, dude, you're engaging in analytical thinking. That's stupid and bad.
Intuition is in fact evidence for or of or from or a God, because thoughts about a God don't in any way demonstrate that a God is real. You have to draw. I don't care if it's intuitive. I didn't say you didn't present empirical evidence. I said you haven't presented any evidence. Even with intuitive evidence, in order to show that intuitive evidence for a God exists or is actually evidence for that God, you have to show that it excludes competing hypotheses, including this person is wrong or delusional. That is what evidence for a proposition is, whether it's empirical, intuitive, or magic.
Like if it's an intuition that there are pink elephants in this room with us and it's just me who has that intuition, yeah, you have to show that I'm not
Finally, we're talking about his only argument. We're 50 minutes in.
delusional. But if it's an intuition that everyone is
53 minutes.
sharing on the basis of biology and natural psychology, that's something else entirely. And when we look at cognitive science of religion,
So this is a disguised argument ad populum. Matt can do two things here. He can demonstrate that he can do two things, and I think one of them has a possible flaw. One, he can say, dude, you're engaging in analytical thinking. What are you doing? I thought we were intuiting. I thought intuitions were good and true and evidence and whatever. What the fuck are you doing? Which I actually think is the better approach. The other thing you can do is you can be like, well, okay, so if there are mechanisms by which we can determine that intuitions are true or false, then we can appraise the intuition that God is real, in which case we're engaging in analytical thought, which you have rejected. So why did you reject that and pretend to reject that? And then you can call it an argument ad populum, which it is. He's basically saying most people have believed a version of this belief, therefore the belief is accurate, even though they're mutually inconsistent. Actually, it's not. It's kind of funny because it's an argument ad populum that also doesn't have the populum. It's saying most people have believed this thing. Now, most people haven't believed the same version of this thing, and certainly not the version that he believes in. But he's saying he's conflating them all, so he can say it's the majority of people who believe, which also wouldn't make it true. The problem, of course, is that now you're engaging in analytical thinking, at which point he's going to back up to can you prove the concept of rationality is reasonable?
specifically, it's a massive field with so much peer-reviewed literature and books that have been published. They show that just like people have intuitions about morality, just like people have intuitions about the law of non-contradiction,
but they're not
just like people
necessarily
have
correct.
intuitions about aesthetics and certain aesthetic principles, they have theological intuitions
No,
about an afterlife.
they kind of
That's why we
don't.
see so many cultures independently.
There can, by the way, be an afterlife without a god. That could be possible. But so it's completely irrelevant.
Have this idea that after we die, our mind persists. That is something biological.
That's not biological, by the way. People have intuitions about that, but we've also been told that for maybe not millions of years, but thousands and thousands and thousands of years. You would have to you'd have to demonstrate that this arose from intuitive beliefs and not from being taught that. And I don't know how you could possibly demonstrate that.
Human psychology. The idea that the universe has been created for a purpose, specifically to benefit.
That is not a thing that people always necessarily believe. Some people believe God's created the universe, but not for a purpose. They just believe that it happened, right? That they did it, not for any particular outcome. Or some even that it was a happenstance of their actions.
In one form or another, in the vast majority of all human religions. If religions are just something that people made up in their villages.
We're 55 minutes in. He's finally making arguments.
is how are all
He
of
has
these
to know
people
that the
across
time
the
is
world
running
at
low,
different
and
times
Matt
and
doesn't have the
places
time to deal with
coming
this.
up with the same exact kind of theology? The belief in God, the belief in God as a creator, and
So remember, this is supposed to
monotheism,
take an hour, this portion.
shared within so many different religions. They
That's
come
also
to
why
the
he's
same
going on at
conclusion.
length. That's why he's just wasting time. He's just running out the clock. We have 5 minutes left. Finally, he's going to make arguments of any kind. Matt definitely does not have the time to respond to it, and he's going to take up as much time as possible to minimize how much Matt can respond with.
Independently of each other. What cognitive scientists of religion say is that this is because it's biologically rooted. So they do surveys of different cultures. They do childhood developmental studies, and they survey children
None of this is
on
relevant.
what they actually
This is not
believe
relevant to his
prior
argument,
to
by the way.
becoming socialized within a particular social milieu, and they identified what I referred to in the presentation as a natural theology. There are certain beliefs. The belief that if you are a bad
wasting
person
time.
and you harm others and you take advantage of others,
This is
the universe
this
is
is both a
somehow going to
filibuster and a
punish you
gish
for
gallop, by
that.
the way.
And if you're a good person, you're a charitable person, the universe will benefit you.
I don't have a watch on my
That is something that is an intuition that's shared universally across all different cultures and religions.
Not saying anything.
So these are things that need to be investigated. They need to be taken into account. It's not
what the fuck does that
someone's
mean?
just delusionally thinking, oh, there might be pink elephants in this room. That's strawmanning the intuitive position.
So it's simply
It's not really a
true
straw
that
man,
all
by the way.
people across.
So he finished. We have less than 5 minutes left. If it's going to keep to about an hour, why did he wait until now to make any sort of argument, to provide any sort of evidence for the existence of God?
All times have come to
I
the
guess it
same
wasn't even evidence,
conclusions
just
or
an
the
argument.
same intuitions about gods or an afterlife. Not only is there a good example in the people of the Paraha and the Amazon that had no God concept until somebody decided to jump in and present them with one. But the various notions.
I didn't know about that, though. That's really interesting.
Which is how we ended up with thousands of different.
If that was true, Matt, if that's true, and I trust that what you're saying is true, you really ought to have pushed back on the intuition thing way earlier. Now it's like way less excusable. You have a really good answer of like, well, no, that intuition isn't universal. So like maybe isn't there evidence that there isn't a God? That look, there are people whose intuition is that there is no God, or that intuition is not to believe in a God.
Religions with thousands of different denominations, and the bigger problem here, this is one of.
And of course, like you could then tease out what Daniel's actual argument on that front was, which is that most people have believed in God, which is nonsense. That's literally an argument ad populum. It's trivial to deal with.
The reasons why the world shifted to what was the phrase that you used, the cultural
colonization. Why don't waste time?
Cognitive colonialism, basically. His view of why we've shifted to a focus that is more on empirical evidence and analytic thinking. And the real reason that happened, it wasn't some atheist cabal, because even though I would like to live in a pod and do drugs and play video games, not all atheists share that goal of mine. But amongst people, there are competing ideas, competing intuitions about a God. There's a reason why religions come in conflict, because they have competing intuitions about a God and no way to demonstrate which, if any of them, are right. And that is why we began to rely more on analytical thinking and assessing data to say, you know what, we can find out what's right.
So this is actually pretty good, and given that like this argument was rattling, that he eventually landed on this argument, it might have been nice to present this a lot earlier to say like, okay, well we use a rational approach because it works. The intuitive approach doesn't work, and we know it doesn't work because your different religions of the world, these different intuitions, are not compatible. They've been arguing for centuries and have no way of determining what's true.
On this, we can't really do it on this, we can do it on this and this, but we can't really do it on this. And you guys who want to rely on intuition about something that you think is...
And that's only like if you're going to like fall into the argument that Daniel wants to have, which Matt mostly had. So like, since we have, like, here's the argument against the intuitive approach.
Important, which the rest of us don't think actually impacts our lives, you'd need to make a demonstration. I agree. If there is a God, that's one of the most important questions ever, which is why I've spent my life addressing it, both as a Christian and as an atheist. But whether or not there's a God,
I was actually thinking it'd be kind of funny if, like, in response to the intuition argument, you just say, well, my intuition is that your argument is completely wrong, so I guess it is, right? And when he pushes back, probably with something to the effect of, like, well, most people have believed this God thing that's very different. It's like, oh, actually, most people intuitively think that you're wrong. And if he tries to push back on that, he'd have to. What is he going to do? Is he going to question whether that's true or not? Well, how would we determine that other than with analytical thinking, which he is opposed to applying to the God belief? Or is he going to say, well, more people believe in the God thing than that I'm wrong? Like, just double down on the argument ad populum? At least it draws out what the issue is
a big enough
into the
question
open.
that if you simply relied on intuition, you might end up in the wrong religion. And so if there is in fact some God, and he's going to judge you, which some of the religions say, based on
not
whether
all
or
of
not
them
you
do.
accept that God versus a competing God.
A note: not even all of the Abrahamic religions care about your belief. Judaism's not big on belief, for example. It's much more on what it is you do. If you believe that Jesus was the Messiah and are a Christian, but still do all of the Jewish rituals and engage in all the prayer and all that stuff, I'm not convinced that you would be, like, inauthentically Jewish too. The belief isn't a real big part of it.
Then it is that God's responsibility to provide sufficient evidentiary warrant for accepting its existence. And if that comes in the form of intuition, that's fine, but it has to be demonstrably reliable. That's the problem of God. And it's the problem of relying on intuition. And it's the reason why, in an hour-long discussion about evidence of God, I'm the only one that actually talked about and addressed all aspects of that topic.
Whether or
This
not
would have been much better if you had been pointing out the deflections the whole time. But
that
all
is
right.
true that harming people for no reason
Nope.
is
Now we're back
wrong.
onto the deflections.
Whether that's true or not, that also has a major impact on human life. It has a huge impact
picked
on
that for
human
debate.
society and politics.
That
Where's
was a good
the
interjection.
demonstrable proof of that? Where
Should've
is the
picked that for
scientific
debate.
evidence? Why can't you answer it? You accept
You
it.
picked the debate topic, not me.
Who is this clown laughing?
Oh, someone who's aware of how ridiculous you are. I'm glad it bothered you, piece of shit.
I laugh at everything he says. Look, show
'Cause
me
I'm
the
fucking
proof.
funny.
Show me the
And I'm right.
demonstrable proof of those kinds of things within morality, law
No,
of
he just wants to
non-contradiction,
deflect.
logic, all of these other things that you take and you accept without objectively verifiable facts. Show me that that is a correct standard to use. If you can't demonstrate that, then why do you have this standard of evidence that you apply just to the question of God? That is inconsistent.
he
Furthermore,
doesn't, by the way.
Amazonian group that you mentioned, they
Oh, by
do
the way, like, again, if you applied this to Daniel, he also wouldn't live up to this. This is the impossible standard again. Daniel also does not believe in every intuitive belief. He doesn't think they're all true, obviously. So to demand, like, oh, why is it that you think some intuitive beliefs are true and some aren't? He doesn't either, obviously. But he's posing that question to Matt to make it seem like Matt can't live up to a very simple fairness principle that obviously no one could. It's literally impossible.
believe in spirit beings. They do believe in an afterlife. So that is shared universally
That's not
amongst
God.
people,
That's
even
not a
in
God
the depths
belief.
of the Amazon. Why? Because it is biologically rooted. And
Sure,
if you want to
but that
go
doesn't
and
prove it's
disagree
true.
with the cognitive scientists of religion,
If anything, that proves if anything, that's evidence that it's not true. If you only believe it because, like, the wires in your brain encouraged you to believe it before you could determine what is true or not, that doesn't prove that it's true. If anything, it's like, well, you believe it only for bad reasons.
go ahead, write a peer-reviewed paper about it. But this kind of new atheist nonsense is old hat, old news. It's been debunked decades ago, but you're just repeating it.
Yeah, this is
So
a problem
I
of
want
not,
to
like,
see
approaching his
demonstration
issues.
of
Yeah.
these other things that you accept as being true, as being correct, that you accept.
Don't
They're
take
also
the bait,
very
Matt.
important for
You
human
did
society,
really well with the
whether
interjections.
morality, whether there's
When
any
he
kind of moral
finishes,
truth, whether
tell
there's an
him it's
external
off topic
world.
again.
Do you think that has something to that is a big part of our understanding of reality? Of course it is. Of course, morality is a big part of our understanding of reality. What about our memories? How do we know for sure? Can you demonstrate to me that the entire universe wasn't created
Just
5
blathering again.
minutes ago and all of our memories of the past were implanted in us? How can you demonstrate that scientifically? Is
No,
there any
you couldn't,
objectively
but-
verifiable fact that can prove that it wasn't? Our memories are pretty important, right? So show me any kind of consistent standard of proof, standard.
But here's the thing. One of the big differences between all of these beliefs that, or maybe not all of these, but a lot of these beliefs that we intuit that Daniel was going on about, like the belief in the existence of the external world, the belief in the past that the universe wasn't just created 5 minutes ago with your memories implanted, is that we don't ever say, well, because it is the case, therefore, like, because it's the case that there is no external world, therefore we should do this. I guess the alternative would be like, well, because the external world exists, we should do stuff, I guess, is sometimes extrapolation. But like, because the past exists, okay, now what? We don't say therefore you should live your life in accordance with the rules that some guy wrote in a book claiming to know God. Like, that's a really big difference.
Of evidence that you're applying
But
to
it's also
God,
all off
show
topic.
where
It would be a bad
applies in these
idea to
other
say what I
very
just did in
critical
a
human
debate.
domains.
Asked and answered. I did it at the beginning. I talked about the standards of evidence and how it applies to a bunch of different claims. This debate is not, hey, Matt, justify everything that I think you believe, which, by the way, everything you think I believe isn't necessarily what I believe. But if you're interested, on my personal YouTube account, I just did a video about whether or not the 5-minute universe hypothesis is true. If you'd picked that as a debate topic, we could have maybe done that. But I've already done it, and I've already addressed this first hour's topic. I have nothing further to add on whether or not there's evidence of God.
No, you do have something further to add, which is that that your opponent has repeatedly refused to give argument for the existence of God until the last 10 minutes.
God when nothing's been presented.
And his opponent, he finally did present something, and now it looks like you're just ignoring it.
Yeah, I mean, this is unexplained. You accept many things as
Yeah,
true,
and now you're just letting him
or you accept
characterize
them
you
as
because you keep
just
trying to throw
working
up your
what
hands and
seems
walk
to work.
away.
But basically,
But you're not
saying that
actually
you feel
walking
that it's
away.
compelling. You have that
That's
intuition.
not what I'm
that
saying.
it's
Based
Just because
on
you finished talking doesn't
It
mean
is
he
not
is.
an
saying
accurate
basically.
representation. No,
It is.
No, it's
Don't
not. I
interrupt. Okay,
specifically
we're back to
pointed out
interruption.
how.
Oh, now you have a problem with interruptions? Who gives a shit? You piece of fucking garbage. Dude, you've been interrupting this whole time. You don't get to complain about
Back
it.
to interruption. We're back to interruption.
Okay, if you're just going to not tell the truth about what I literally said, people can rewind. It's fine.
No, you
People
said
can
something.
rewind, it's
I'm
fine.
interpreting what you said.
Yeah,
I'm
incorrectly.
interpreting what you
You're
said.
actively interpreting it
Interpretation
Yes,
incorrectly.
they do.
Flawed epistemology.
Yeah.
What they need
You,
is
oh,
what
no.
I
The
actually
debate is
fucking
about
said.
is there evidence for God, not
Yeah,
epistemology.
he's literally mocking Matt for being correct about what the topic is. This is why he should have appealed to the moderator of like, hey, was the topic of discussion, is there evidence for the existence of God? If that was actually what they agreed to, which I mean obviously I don't know because they haven't made it explicit, like then no, he's undeniably right. He has made way too few appeals to the moderator given what Daniel's approach has been.
The debate was
Literally mocking
is
his
there
opponent.
evidence of
Evidence
God?
is epistemology,
You
you
picked it.
fool.
You can derp all you want. This is your fault, not
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah, derp all you want. So, again,
Brings us to the next section of our debate. We're going to have a 5-minute intermission.
Okay, so that part of the debate is over. We will pick up the rest of this later. We've already been here for close to 3 hours, and I don't want to do another. If we're doing 3 hours per section, I'm not doing 9 hours on this. That's all I'm saying. We will come back to this another time because it is interesting, mostly for the problems I'm finding in Matt's approach. So this is a big thing that this is why it makes it is a little encouraging to me because it's the kind of thing that I wanted I thought was valuable out of the existence of this channel. Is I have the debater's approach to a lot of these issues, and I can see where things are going off the rails in a way that someone who engages in debate but never did competitive debate might not realize. What this debate came down to was mostly what would be called topicality in debate, is like whether you're on topic, but that's based on an overview that Daniel laid out. His basic argument being that, one, he was. I've made the arguments for why it is this. I'm not going to justify what my characterization is here. His major argument being anti-rationalist, opposed to the concept of rationality arguing we should instead defer to intuition, and that there is an intuition that God exists. Two things needed to happen from Matt. Deal with the argument from intuition, which is easy. It's very, very easy to do. There are a couple ways of doing it. One, you could say it's obviously an argument ad populum. Now, obviously, that falls into the analytical thinking thing, but we'll get to that. Alternatively, you can say, well, you don't agree with all intuitions, so you have a mechanism of discerning one from the other that must necessarily be non-intuitive. That's not necessarily true, but again, we'll get to that. And then the third way of doing it is going, hey man, intuitively that just doesn't seem right. I don't think that's true, or that one leads to the other, so that's probably not real. And then dare him to find a way to argue against that without falling into the same trap he set for you. And then the other thing that needed to happen was to do a stronger, more pointed version of what Matt attempted to do. Point out that your opponent is completely anti-rational, not just irrational, but opposed to the argument of opposed to the concept of reason, opposed to argument and evidence on their not like in uncertain terms, but explicitly opposed to the concept of argument and evidence in a debate. Point out that this is completely off topic, that this has nothing to do with whether there's evidence for God, and then appeal to the moderator. Be like, hey man, we're wasting time talking about anything other than evidence for the existence of God, and my opponent has stated explicitly that he has no interest in engaging on that axis, and instead wants to argue against the concept of reason in a debate. And just don't talk, like, for real, just make it a problem for the moderator. That's what needed to happen. Matt insufficiently did the first part. He pushed back a little against the intuition, but not, and I think, in a conclusive way. Not in a way where you can just put a bow on it and we are done with that. This argument is over. You need to do something more to make it relevant again. He didn't really do that. And he insufficiently did the second, and I think he didn't address the issue. I guess there were three things, right? It's address the intuition argument, address the anti-rationality, and then address that we're off topic. He didn't do the second one at all. And that was a huge problem. That was hurting him the whole debate. Because now when he pushes back against stuff, he's like, but like the analytical approach is fucking stupid, and you agree with some intuitive beliefs but not others. That's ridiculous. Shouldn't all of them? Like, it's nonsense. It was complete nonsense. Word salad most of the time. And then the third thing was like, hey, we're completely off topic. He did well sometimes, but he kept getting baited and pulled right back in. The moderator didn't speak one time throughout the whole conversation when this was an issue of whether we're on topic or not. That was both a problem of the moderator, who wasn't making sure that we were talking about what we're supposed to be talking about, and a problem of Matt of seeing that the moderator wasn't doing that, pushing him to do it. Be like, hey man, this is what I'm here for. Went out of my way to be here. This guy is wasting my time. Why are we doing this? And for real, I think he should have made like veiled threats about it. Not like threats against a person, obviously, but like threats about like, I'm just gonna leave. Because if we're here for 3 topics and this is the disinterest that Daniel has in debating the subject of this debate, why would I have any reason to think that he's actually going to argue on topic, on the subject for the other 2? Why am I here for this? Like, I'll just fucking leave. Because if he's not here for the debate, why should I be? He's here in person, but not in argument. So why should I be here at all? And I think if he had made that appeal, something could have happened that would have pushed things in the right way. As much as Daniel is unambiguously incorrect at everything he said in this entire debate, he did win. And while debate isn't a like win or lose proposition, generally speaking, this became about power, and this became about whether you can control what's being talked about, and whether it's even possible to walk away from this having no longer believing in God became impossible the moment he set the framing. And in those terms, Daniel ended up winning. And it's really sad to see, because not only is he completely wrong, if he is able to convince people a little bit, they might listen to him more, and the totalities of his views are, well, I struggle for appropriate hyperbole. I'll put it that way. They are absolutely horrendous. And so I think Matt failed a lot in his obligations as a debater. I I think he could have done a lot better. He made good efforts at it, but he struggled a lot in ways where I think like having a clearer view of what was happening would have made him struggle a lot less. I want to point out again the amount to which I think modern day debate is irresponsibly platforming Daniel Haqiqatjou, in part because of how odious he is, but also because he is so openly willing to argue against rationality in a debate and completely talk off topic with the sole point of derailing a conversation, just so he can like assert his dominance and maybe sway people over to his absolutely repugnant positions. So we'll leave it there. We're not going to pick up with this tomorrow because tomorrow is Magic Day, and I do have confirmation from Hexic that we will be doing These Are the Questions on Thursday, so that'll be fun. If anyone has any interesting ideas on questions, please send them in. They don't always have to be as spicy as the last one. I have some written down, but I'm always in the market for more, and it's possible we can get through more than one in a day. So we'll see how that goes. But we will come back to this probably next week. I am interested in seeing what else happened, in part because I think there are a lot of instructive mistakes. I guess I'll put it that way. I think there were a lot of failings on Matt's part that we can learn from, and I don't want this to come off like, oh, I would have done better. I just want this. I instead want to impress upon you that there are differences in approach that lead to better understandings of argumentative dynamics, and um, and we can learn from mistakes in that approach. I hope I've helped you understand why engaging in the way Matt did was such a problem, and why it played right into Daniel's hands, and how you, if you're in a similar position, which unlikely, uh, can respond in a better way. So I hope you found that interesting. I certainly did, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!